Welcome, everybody, to the Stand To. And it's an honor to welcome you virtually. And thank you all for being flexible with our inclement weather here in Dallas. But despite the weather, we're honored at the Bush Center to take on the work that President and Mrs. Bush started while they were in the White House and to engage with new work inspired by their values. And the veterans community has been near and dear to their hearts, as so many of you know. At the Bush Center, the values that drive all our work are freedom, opportunity, accountability, and compassion. And we apply those values to our mission of engaging the world by developing leaders, advancing policy, and taking action to address today's most pressing challenges. And central to our mission success is our ability to convene. And a group like we're convening today is evidence of just how impactful we can be to bring the right people together at the right time to discuss the right topic. We owe a debt of gratitude to our veterans, and that's why the conversations we're having today are so important and more important than ever. I want to thank you all for being here and for being important parts of this continuing work. We are also grateful at the Bush Center to the Boeing Company, who continue to be a champion for our military service initiatives work. You'll have the opportunity to hear from Boeing's Dr. Kristin Saboe, also a Bush Institute Stand To Veteran Leadership Program scholar. Thanks also to our partners at the Institute for Veterans and Military Families at Syracuse University for their continued partnership. And we're also grateful for our shared friend and partner, Dan Daniello. His tireless support means so much to both of us. We look forward to sharing the results from a new study we've been working on with IBMF, and you'll hear from Dr. Nick Armstrong and our own Matt Amidon shortly. As always, we are thankful to April and Jay Graham for their support of our April and Jay Graham Fellow, Bob McDonald. You may know him as the former Secretary of Veterans Affairs. He joined the Military Service Institute here at the Bush Center last year, and we're honored to have him on board as a fellow. He will be participating in the Taking Action panel later on. Conoco Phillips has been a longtime supporter of our military service initiative as well. And I want to set a shout out to Ryan Lance and his team for their leadership and commitment to veterans. We're glad to partner with Comcast NBC Universal. Comcast General Counsel Carol Eager recently spoke to our Veterans Leadership Program alumni and has been a great friend to the Bush Institute. Thanks to Dave McIntyre and Tri West for their continued support of our work, as well as their leadership and commitment to our nation's veterans. And we want to advance our health and well-being works thanks for the high quality care that group continues to promote. And we're thankful for the support of the Wounded Warrior Project and the Bob Woodruff Foundation. And finally, a note of thanks to our Military Service Initiative supporters and friends in attendance this afternoon who couldn't be with us today. We wouldn't be where we are without you and your support. But enough from me. And now from someone you really would like to hear from, the 43rd President of the United States.
I want to thank all who are gathered for your concern about our veterans. Here at the Bush Center, we care deeply about helping vets transition from military to civilian life with the full understanding that a vet brings enormous skill and leadership qualities to our society. I know there's problems amongst some vets, and our intention here at the Bush Center is to identify those problems and work with you to help solve them. Our country benefits when our veterans transition. Our country is better because of those who volunteer to serve our nation. Thank you for your concern, and God bless.
Ladies and gentlemen, old friends and new, welcome. Welcome, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives to join us here today. For those of you who I haven't met, I'm Matt Amidon, and I have the great honor of serving as the director of the Military Service Initiative here at the Bush Institute. Having been with this team for the last almost 8 years has revealed, of course, the great value of working for inspiring leaders alongside inspiring and committed partners, where we together advance outcomes for our post 9/11 veterans and their families. As most of you know, we are in the midst of a winter storm for the ages. Texans, as we do, are making the most of it, and you'll see my virtual background as an example of that. And with that, though, a special thanks to the amazing Bush Institute team for making today possible. I am certainly at the point now where I am ready for days of normalcy to arrive, wherein we can all gather again together in person. But in lieu of that, and considering the opportunity ahead, I trust this format is very much the next best thing to keep the conversation, the collaboration, and the direction going. This year's convening follows up on the work that was started so long ago in 2014 and our first summit where we discussed roles and responsibilities for key stakeholders. Through 2015 and the framework of what right looks like, onward to the 2016 Invictus Games, where alongside our international partners, we all highlighted the impacts of the invisible wounds. And then to tie it all together, the first Stand To of 2017, where we convene the task forces to improve outcomes for veteran transition in 3 critical areas: employment, education, and health and well-being. We followed that with another Stand To in 2018, and since then, like so many of you, we have worked to advance outcomes through key partnerships with efforts informed by relevant data. This is revealed in our deep investment in our Veteran Wellness Alliance, which is a data-informed partnership focused on access to care that results in the outcomes we are looking for. So today, with the recent change in administration, a public and renewed commitment to service members, veterans, and their families, with the return of joining forces and a very notable addition to the Domestic Policy Council, where you'll hear from Terry Tennillian later today. So within this gathering today, we are afforded the opportunity to leverage another critical inflection point, and we remain so grateful to our partners, sponsors, friends, task force members, and everyone here watching. So before we dive in, let's level set a little and speak to the framework that guides what we do here at the Military Service Initiative, and I hope you'll find useful as we all want to lead in the same direction. As President Bush said in his welcome to you all, we all have the understanding of the enormous skills our vets bring to the table, and our country is better because of those who have volunteered to serve. With that, as he said, we want to continue to identify problems accurately and collaborate with all of you to solve them. And as we all know, no one entity can do it alone. And in support of that, we believe there are 3 imperatives that drive the work we all do. The first being the moral and social. I know everybody here today understands that it is simply the right thing to do. But a successful transition is also a national security issue, the imperative to preserve our all-volunteer force. And as we sit here today, there are men and women standing the watch overseas in harm's way. But finally, this is also a matter of global competitiveness and civic leadership. With the right transition, our men and women and their families will come home to start new businesses and lead critical roles for our economy and in our communities. So as we look to guideposts along the way, so much of the work we do here can be effectively nested within an organizing framework of recognize, connect, and deliver. And you'll hear the themes of this nested throughout the day, through our panels and beyond. Are we recognizing the true need signals of our population, given that this is dynamic and changing rapidly? We will speak to some of that early in our agenda with the changing makeup of our all-volunteer force. In doing so, are our data and research efforts accurately mapped to that need? Once we have an accurate and relevant picture informed by data, how do we then connect those in need to one another, communities, and critical support systems and resources? And when we do finally connect them, how do we ensure that what is delivered to those in need is of the quality necessary to produce the desired outcome? So within that guiding framework, we'll begin our day with a quick pass through our most recent data and research efforts with our partners at Syracuse, Institute for Veterans and Military Families, and SSRS. From this top-line conversation, we will dive into the task force work, and you will hear the latest from each of the 3. We will then hear from our panel of key stakeholders who will speak to the importance of action on behalf of recommendations and what various sectors can do to help advance outcomes. Finally, we will hear from the platform of the new administration and where they are focused. As we do, please visit our website to see some of the products and links that we have in support of the day, and we look forward to working with all of you to move forward on some ambitious plans that follow. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks again. Now, as we pivot to the more functional part of the day, I'm honored to welcome a friend and colleague to the panel here, Dr. Nick Armstrong from Syracuse University's IVMF. Nick, welcome and good to see you, and thanks for coming today.
Thanks, Matt. So glad to be here today with you and everyone else.
So with this partnership, we started, I don't even remember how many years ago. I think it was 2013, 2014, where we began with a landscape review of the transition concerns for post 9/11 vets and their families. Let's start back there for a moment. When we took that first landscape review and pulse check, what did we learn back then? And I want to set that as a framework for then what we learned today and the differences in between. Can you share some of the top lines?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really important to remember where we were at that point in time. Remember, we were a few years removed from the great economic recession. We were in the midst of a big drawdown in forces and a spike in transitioning service members into their communities across the country. You had a number of polls that had come out at that point in time. I think Pew had done a handful, and it was really focused around misunderstandings and the civ-mil divide, and Americans not having a full appreciation for what post 9/11 veterans were experiencing in their transition. You also had the big sea of goodwill that we talked about with all the investment and resources and energy being put in helping to support those in transition. And it really at that point in time was focusing on understanding all the different sectors that were making investments into this community. Private industry was out in front with the Veteran Jobs Mission, the U.S. Chamber, all these employers making big commitments to helping support those in the employment transition. And what we were really trying to understand was how can we better align the different sectors to start to match and understand the needs of those in transition at that point in time.
No, I think that's a great summary, and I like it. It's always, history matters. History is here, and to remember your comments on the sea of goodwill. Obviously, that was a significant economic recovery for our country, where we were focused on that of unemployment. And I think we now agreed that this latest effort we have, 7 years have passed, and it really comes down to how coordinated perhaps is the sea of goodwill, and how do we know we're doing right. So it was time for a pulse check anew. And so with you guys up in Syracuse and with our friends at SSRS, we looked within the lens of what has changed or not over time. What have we learned? And specifically as a moderator, how has COVID-19 impacted the lives of our post 9/11 vets? So for our guests here today, and Nick, as you and our team at MSI know, we did a quick pulse check survey of post 9/11 vets. The top line findings for our viewers are on our website. And this really looked again at the three domains of employment, education, and health and well-being. But alongside that, and again, to you and the team, Nick, Deb, Rosie, Andy, and the rest, we did a comprehensive report, which you'll see on our website as well, which is that multi-year review of available data, research, and observations on progress we have made, opportunities to continue that progress across those domains. So let's level set a little bit. The population, the veteran population we looked at 7 years ago is different from today. What sort of highlighted for you, Nick, what are the key differences in the veteran population today? How do you see it changing, demographics, diversity, and things like that? Just give us a little flavor there.
Sure. I think, pointing back to 2013, I think the number we had been citing was around 22 million veterans overall. Over time, the post 9/11 veteran population has increased, but the big picture, the overall veteran population is on the decline. I think that's no surprise to many. I think today we sit and hover right around 18 million veterans. And some of the projections, actually, if you look out even to the mid 2030s, 2037, you're estimating under 14 million, so about 13.7 million. So I know it's 15 years, 16 years from now is not that far away. And then if you start to look at the post 9/11 veteran segment of that, we're sitting over 4 million veterans. And so that's about 1 in 5 of veterans today have served since the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I think that's important to note, and also to note that we're coming up on our 20 years removed from those attacks. And this is the largest segment by years. So thinking about we're looking at experiences and needs of an era of prior service members that now spans 2 decades. And I think that's important to some of the future discussions on how we continue to serve and support this population.
Yeah, no, that's great. We've chatted many times about the multi-generation generation. And so
Right.
not only, within a certain demographic, the needs of somebody who transitioned out in 2002 are uniquely and distinctly different than somebody who transitions out today. So what
Yeah.
we've seen, and I think you and I have chatted, of course, about our data set within through SSRS and the research you did, but also our friends within and around the space, some notables like TVMI and our
Mhm.
friend at Penn State as well. We know that it's a small and a declining veteran population. We know the portion that's post 9/11. It's becoming more diverse with time. So
Mhm.
let's dive a little bit into diversity. And I think what our survey shows, and I think some of the other supporting surveys that we've leveraged, there has revealed some disparity then in service and transition experience. And I'll point back to sort of the open, which is where we said, how well do we recognize the unique needs of some of those more at-risk subpopulations? So share a little bit about, your knowledge of sort of the growing diversity of the veteran population and how well are we matching our research needs to that growing diversity?
I think that's a great question. I think it really depends if you're comparing the diversity of the population to general Americans versus past eras. If you look at how the post 9/11 veteran population stacks up to prior service eras, without a doubt, it is more diverse. Definitely seen an increase in women veterans, Black and Hispanic veterans in particular, relative to past generations. So it is growing more diverse. However, it doesn't necessarily stack up against American population, or if you start to peel it back and look at different segments, for example, officer and enlisted differences. But with that, we know that those segments are growing. In fact, the women veteran segment is growing and is expected to grow over the next several decades. And we know that those are sort of like some of the leading indicators of how we're adapting services and supports across the country to meet different needs and barriers that different segments might be experiencing in their transition.
No, I think that's great, and it hits on the key point is as we grow to know more about these growing subpopulations and the increasing diversity of our force and our veteran population, how can we predict where those needs will be and not meet them after the fact? But I think what was interesting to us through our survey, let's talk about the transition experience. Now we know by and large that post 9/11 veterans as a population are more likely to have a service-connected disability, more likely to have been deployed multiple times and have seen combat, but also with higher levels of education and things of the like. But I think what was interesting was, and this is a shout out to the TAP program, we looked at those who went through TAP later, vice earlier, and I think we saw some improvements, correct? Share with us what we saw there.
Yeah, I mean, I go back to my own transition in 2007. I think at that point in time, it was a la carte, in voluntary. So clearly a big difference in terms of what we're seeing in terms of what folks are indicating that they've actually leveraged what they've learned in TAP in their transition, and seeing over half, at least in our survey, we saw about half or so mentioned a positive experience in terms of being able to leverage what they learned. And then that's also consistent with some of the recent survey reports coming out of the federal agencies around surveys with respect to how TAP is working for those in transition.
Well, within and through transition, one thing we're always focused on in both of our organizations and across the space is with greater knowledge, we have greater information, we can turn that into something actionable, into true intelligence to act on. We know barriers to access to resources remain, and we're worried about some of those key captures today. Within our data, are we solving for the first problem? Is the data leading us astray, or leading us to a conclusion. So I just want to take a quick 1-minute detour and point to a paper you did recently, your systematic review of needs assessments. And you talked about barriers to accessing care, not only being cultural, but others. Share with us a little bit of that, and then we'll pivot right into our 3 domains of transition.
Yeah, I mean, so about 2 years ago, a teammate of ours and myself took a big scan at all the needs assessments that have been commissioned over the last decade or so, and certainly there have been multiple over the last year with respect to COVID. But really wanted to get an understanding of how are these needs assessments, being leveraged and rolled up in a way that helps to build a knowledge base of what we're seeing across the country. And we looked at different types of needs that the studies themselves examined, and things that we talk about often: employment, access to resources and communities, things of that nature have been covered. But you definitely see a wide variation in terms of how the studies are designed, how they're utilized, how they're compared. And what we're finding is, like, a lot of these are difficult to compare against each other. They're either really local or covering specific types of needs. Definitely saw some gaps with respect to looking at things like women veterans needs, things like financial security and food instability, rural access to care, getting and driving towards some of these barriers. Those in particular, but also things like navigating resources and communities. We see commonly across these that when veterans do experience needs, they don't experience one in isolation. And so that points to how are we addressing across these different domains in building systems that work together in that way to support navigation and reduce those barriers.
No, I appreciate that. And I think it's not only when barriers are overcome have we solved for anything. Then what comes next is outcomes. Access is first, and high quality outcomes are next. And I know that's where we're pivoting the work of our task forces. So we got a few minutes left. Let's dive into our domains that we focused on in employment, education, and health and well-being in and through our survey. And just as some top lines to our viewers, I think to your point, Nick, what it reveals is that by and large, generally, some people are doing quite well, but there's notable indicators of disparity in experience and quality and transition for some of those more, I would say, at-risk subpopulations. Let's start with employment. And before we do, I just want to give a shout out to our friend Dan Goldenberg, who I think does a great job of reminding us of the inelegant way we measure unemployment first, the end result being sometimes we really don't know what we want to know. But Nick, as you and I have chatted about, it's not just unemployment, and the numbers, they are what they are right now for the veteran population, but really, are we getting more nuanced into that problem and opportunity of underemployment? So share with us your thoughts and reflections on the employment portion of our research and survey.
Well, first off, shout out to Dan. Dan's absolutely right. Unemployment is one indicator, but it does not tell or paint the full picture of a veteran's sort of economic health or how they're doing in their job. That's one key issue. And as you start to unpack that, you start to see, back to our discussion at the top around how different segments of the population are experiencing employment in different ways. We're seeing labor market outcomes, meaning like things like your earnings vary quite a bit by race and ethnicity, gender. So we're seeing pay gaps and opportunities that are different by different types of groups. We're also seeing that the employment transition today still is very much a top concern for those that are in transition. You start to look at both our survey, but also numerous reports throughout the last half decade or more still point to that first year, that first job being a critical challenge that folks are experiencing. But underemployment's been a topic of concern really for the last several years. There've been a number of different studies and surveys that have come out on that issue. We addressed it in our survey. Also pointing back to the Veterans Metrics Initiative, Penn State has looked at this. There are enough surveys and studies out there to indicate this is a real thing that needs to continue to be explored and tackled in a more rigorous, evidence-based way, to understand like how can we actually address this as a community. And then, of course, we're just barely beginning to see the impacts of COVID-19. We talked about how is data aligned to matching the need, and a lot of the employment figures and data that we rely on are actually looking in the rearview mirror. There are the monthly employment reports, but those are limited, as I mentioned with Dan's point that he's been driving. So how are we understanding and looking at those different segments, both not just the segments of the post 9/11 veteran community being impacted, but where are they in different industries? How are those industries being impacted? Are folks even leaving the job force altogether right now? And those are some of the things that I think we need to continue to move the research community forward to help to unpack some of those insights in real time.
This is our survey report right here. And again, to our friends joining today, you can go check out the top line summary on our website. But to your point, Nick, I think in terms of financial security in some ways, now there are many of our fellow Americans and veterans are challenged by this COVID environment and pandemic. But among our respondents, among our post 9/11 veterans who are currently employed, 9 out of 10 said there was excellent or very good chance that if they wanted to stay in their present job, they could keep it for the next 2 years. So that's a bit of good news for us. And also, it appears that some of the work we've done in the past decade or so has led to better alignment with that first best job post-service. And good, a lot of work remains with the underemployment and right career fit. But 6 in 10 of our post 9/11 vets said their current or most recent job was in their preferred career field. Now, I would again encourage our guests today to go check out the top line, because again, Nick, as we're seeing, there are some disparities in that response based on whether it's from the minority population or our women veterans as well.
Absolutely. And I'd also say, pointing back to the Veterans Metrics Initiative, like understanding what types of components from programs and supports that folks have received. We're seeing that folks that are in those jobs that align with their preferred career fields, were receiving or participated in employment training programs and more hands-on types of programs that provided those supports. And that's an important data set that I think we're going to continue to help want to help understand how are we driving programs across the country to reduce those barriers to getting that good job match right out of the gate.
Well, I look forward to, we all look forward to hearing more of that from our employment task force, talking through their lanes of the future and work and other things. And also you've mentioned many times about education, and higher education appears to be one of the biggest moderating factors when looking across other post-transition outcomes, particularly earnings. And we can't ever be afraid to say, I want education to get a better job and make more money. And so, share with us some top lines of the education. It does appear that the post 9/11 generation still skews more and better educated than when compared to, I think, civilian populations. How true is that? And what did we learn from our survey?
Well, that's absolutely true. We're seeing that actually those with a bachelor's degree or higher actually are reporting better transition experiences, better ease of navigation, both from the not just the employment perspective, but across other factors like navigating health and wellness, healthcare services in their communities. And so we definitely see that both from our survey and from a number of the studies that we've looked at and the data across the last half decade or more. That is certainly a huge factor in helping support a positive transition.
No, and again, as we punch up against our time here a little bit. Education is certainly a positive moderator, successful transitions and follow-on outcomes. What was interesting from the survey is there were some good stories. However, in the health and well-being section, people are doing fairly well, but for those who have physical challenges, it appears they get into and receive care, but still appears to be that persistent barrier in even seeking care at all in the first place for that of the psychological. And I know that's a barrier we want to address. Any comments there from you guys?
No, I would just echo what you mentioned there from the survey itself, and how are we, particularly the barriers around help seeking and stigma, and peer-to-peer outreach. I think is an item that we've addressed a bit in our report. Like those types of interventions that are both evidence-based but help to reduce those barriers, I think are continue to be super critical right now. Just given a high focus around reintegration issues. Of course, suicide has been a huge topic of late.
Well, and I know we'll look forward to hearing from our health and well-being panel later, but how do we break down barriers? How do we enhance access to care that is delivered to derive positive outcomes? And I know that we have all seen some solutions presented within and through the realities of COVID, and those that appear to be successful. How do we allow for those to maintain and into the out years and into long-term solutions? But we finished the report, and I think it was a pretty exciting section about that of the cross sector, and we had sort of those themes of focus, which I think you'll see, and Nick would love to hear from you, nested within the remainder of our day, which is how do we together collaboratively across our task forces and as a whole of nation effort address barriers in society, growing knowledge of our diversifying force, greater diversity within the force, and data and research, knowing that we have a mountain of data. How well can we aggregate it and turn this information into something actionable? So let's take a quick lap through those three themes and your thoughts there. And I think that's a wonderful way to kind of conclude, tie a bow on the research we did together.
Sure. So, I mean, just starting with the first one, barriers in society. I think one of the things we've been talking about as a community for the last 5+ years is around addressing myths and stigmas, and the hero victim narrative that's been part of our narrative over the last several years. How are we continuing to help educate general Americans about the differences of if you've met one veteran, you've met one veteran, and everyone has different experiences, and the needs are different depending on different service experiences. So whether you're, we see that in the workplace, helping employers understand those myths and understand the value of the veteran. You see it in higher education as well, helping educators, faculty, staff understand the value of student veterans on their campus. And we talk a lot around culturally competent care in the health and well-being sectors. That's definitely a cross-cutting theme that I think we're, with a declining veteran population overall, that's going to be something we're going to need to continue to address across all lanes. Diversity, again, I think that's been a topic we've covered throughout this talk, but understanding that with the differences of experiences and different segments of the veteran population, and having different types of barriers to needs and where they're transitioning to, and different communities, understanding that the diversity of need and being able to provide more tailored support across these lanes is also very important. And then, I think data and research, that's an area, we live and breathe. But, I think certainly an area for us to continue to drive toward. How are we designing studies that can be compared over time, as well as looking to study what works and as far as program interventions. I think it's both the research community, but also philanthropy and funders that are working with nonprofits across the country in terms of helping support better tracking of outcomes. So we can know both in real time what seems to be working in responsive to crisis, the COVID-19 being a perfect case in point, but also at the same time, investing in rigorous longitudinal studies like the Veterans Metrics Initiative, like the Millennium Cohort Study, so we can understand truly what is working and being able to feed that into better policy and program and practice. So a lot of work ahead for us, but
a lot of work.
I'm excited where we've come so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of work continues. A lot of work has been done, and I think those are three sort of great lanes of effort for us to focus our team here in the task force and all of our stakeholders in the space. Like you said, there's a lot of data out there. It's how do we synthesize it in some ways. I know we have our own efforts here with our health and well-being team with our common data elements. Ask the same question, try to capture the same language in some ways. But as we do that, we tie a bow on this data and research portion of the day, and we pivot to our three task forces where they're coming up with findings, observations, recommendations that are informed by our data and research efforts, most recently conducted with our friends again at IBMF and SSRS. So Nick, again, thank you so much, and thanks to our guests. I really encourage all of you to go check out the website and the top line findings from our survey, and also the report that I think you'll find very informative, revealing that as our veteran population declines, we have greater awareness and knowledge, we hope, of growing disparities in service experience and transition outcomes for some of our more at-risk subpopulations. Nick, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the great partnership.
Hi, my name is Kristin Saboe. I'm a senior manager at Boeing, responsible for leading our HR veterans and military families work, amongst other talent strategies. I'm also a veteran and a proud scholar of the 2019 Bush Institute Stand to Veterans Leadership Program. I'm delighted to introduce the next portion of the 2021 National Veterans Convening, which will include a panel for each of the three task forces established through the Bush Institute. Each panel will highlight the findings and recommendations for each of the task forces to date, focused on health and well-being, education, and employment. We are living during truly extraordinary times. And in my opinion, what makes this time particularly extraordinary within the military and veterans space is the opportunity we have to not only invest in the military and veterans communities and continue their betterment, but to also lead the recovery for the communities that surround us worldwide. This is a lofty statement, but one I have no doubt that we can rise to meet. The military and veterans communities, due to its core responsibilities, are experts in knowing how to thrive and adapt by developing advanced solutions for communities during and after crisis. While in uniform, I served as a research psychologist conducting research on just this, well-being and change. This work has been readily translated into what we now know as resilience, grit, hardiness, and national strategies focused on reducing suicide and increasing well-being. Beyond this example, the military has paved the way in numerous other ways when it comes to advances in technology, medicine, and occupational training, just to name a few, and that these have set the standard for product development in civilian industries. The military time and again demonstrates the art of the possible when a need is present, whether that is the incredible technological advancement seen when a W amputee veteran competes in a triathlon, or the amazing feats our veterans and military families accomplish thanks to the education funded and received through their GI Bill, or the opportunity to be part of a team sending a person to Mars, enabled by participating in an upskilling program, such as that Boeing is launching later this year called Future Force. For many that are unaffiliated with the military, thriving through crisis was not in their personal narrative or understanding prior to the current COVID-19 pandemic. But because of the pandemic, it is now in everyone's narrative. This community and the solutions presented by the Bush Institute, such as establishing a national veterans strategy, improving data gathering and sharing with a renewed focus on high-risk and diverse populations, reducing barriers to employment such as through licensing and certifications, and creating a more equitable society by granting more consistent access to technology will all improve and advance the state of affairs for our post-9/11 veterans and their families. But what is further impactful is that these solutions are no longer needed just within our military communities. These are solutions that would be game-changing when applied to the world's communities as they seek to recover as well. In this way, I encourage us all to think about the advancements and expertise the great work at the Bush Institute has enabled for our post-9/11 veterans and their military families. But I would also like to challenge each of you to think about how we can leverage our expertise in our communities to aid our civilian neighbors as they learn to thrive during and after crisis. The civilian and military divide is often one that is present because of cultural and experiential-based differences. We have an opportunity to find common footing with our neighbors now because we have all experienced crisis, and we all must learn to recover together. In doing so, we have an opportunity to simultaneously build a more equitable and accessible world around us and help our civilian counterparts better grasp experiences that are commonplace for our military, veterans, and their families. There is much work to be done, and it continues to be my privilege to work with the incredible leadership team at the Bush Institute and in our military and veteran space as we collectively seek to advance the betterment of our military and veteran communities and also the world's. And with that, please enjoy the recommendations that each of the incredibly capable and impactful leaders in the coming panels will share. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as employment and the next career remains one of the enduring and critical concerns for our veterans and their families, we are excited here today to share our focus of effort, key observations, and next steps. A considerable amount of hard work has been done over the last 20 years to reduce veteran unemployment, and as a result, the conversation today is shifting to meaningful employment, tackling underemployment, veteran education and credentialing, and shaping the veteran employee of the future. In my role as one of the task force co-chairs, I am joined by two of my colleagues on the task force, retired Brigadier General John Quintus, who serves as Amazon's Managing Director of Global Military Affairs, and Lisa Lutz, the President of Solid. Established in 2017, the Veteran Employment Task Force serves as a conduit for public, private, and nonprofit organizations to collaborate and identify solutions to today's veteran employment challenges. Each organization brings their experience, point of view, and leading practices, and how we can collectively improve employment outcomes for transitioning service members and veterans. In 2020, the task force members formed working groups focused on 3 lanes of effort. The future of work, which is how organizations transform their work, their workforce, and their place of work, and identify, hire, and develop dynamic people. A credentialing working group. We know that developing new skills and continuously advancing existing ones will be increasingly critical to securing employment. Credentialing is a key tool for doing that, so credentialing programs often include education and training components. The final working group was an assessment of public, private, and nonprofit veteran employment initiatives in place over the last decade. And the group looked at how these programs have adapted to COVID-19 and the characteristics each has to be enduring despite changes in how we work. Before we get to our panelists, it's important to highlight what the data is telling us about veteran employment and why there is much more work to be done to support veteran employees. 53% of employees said that between half and all of their workforce will need to change their skills and capabilities in the next 3 years. Many surveys point to underemployment as an ongoing issue. Depending on the survey, veteran unemployment is anywhere between 30 to 60%. In the recent George W. Bush Institute IVMF post 9/11 Veteran Transition Survey, among post 9/11 veterans who are currently employed, 92% said there was an excellent, very good, or good chance that if they wanted to stay in their present job, they could keep it for the next 2 years. This is great news. But only 60% of post 9/11 veterans said their current or most recent job was in their preferred career field, suggesting that more work is needed there. With these data points in mind, let's talk about the future of work. The Future of Work Working Group discussed how organizations prepare for an increasingly dynamic future of work and how they can be prepared and resilient. Current research suggests that in hiring candidates of the future, characteristics such as curiosity, adaptability, and perseverance may be a good indicator of success in addition to experience and skills. John, when most people think about the future of work, they think about the ever-shifting demand for skills, increasing remote work, automation, human-machine teaming, artificial intelligence, and more. But the working group also found that communication skills and other characteristics will continue to be relevant and highly sought after. How does Amazon look at both skills and experience, as well as the characteristics Amazon uses as performance predictors?
Thanks, Liz. And you're right. The Future of Work Working Group research revealed that 57% of global jobs are vulnerable to automation. 41% of organizations are adopting cognitive and artificial intelligence within their workforce. And the trend that we've been seeing, shifting to remote work, which has been accelerated by COVID, is only expected to increase in 2021 by as much as 25 to 30%. This continues to signal the demand for skills and experience in just an ever-shifting environment, which can be very concerning if you're a transitioning service member, seeking to translate your current military skills and experience into a rewarding post-military career. So it's been exciting to be part of the task force as we've uncovered a bit of a theory, but I'm gonna lay an argument that may be a bit proven out for Amazon, that companies, as they seek to identify, hire, and develop dynamic people, they are more and more basing their decisions on characteristics as a primary indicator of future success over skills and experience, which is maybe more of a traditional view. And by characteristics, we mean those very special qualities or traits of a person that distinguish them from others. The working group is exploring this theory. First, by examining those private, public, and nonprofit organizations that have already adopted this approach. And of course, one of those companies is my company, Amazon. So in his very first letter to shareholders in 1997, Jeff Bezos set the foundation of our company culture with 6 core values and a mission to be Earth's most customer-centric company. And those core values remain today. In fact, at the end of every shareholder letter, which I hope all of you are reading, Jeff closes with a statement that says, "As always, I attach a copy of our original 1997 letter. Our approach remains the same, and it's still day one." And so how has Amazon been able to kind of propagate this very consistent culture over the years as the company has grown, into more than 1 million people, more than 1 million employees? Well, those original 6 core values are now 14 leadership principles. And at Amazon, our leadership principles describe how Amazon does business, how leaders lead, and how we keep the customer at the center of our decisions. We believe that the leadership principles outline what we value most in our people, in leadership, and that they are a very clear articulation of the things that have always been a part of what makes Amazon what it is. But we have to create mechanisms and process to ensure that the leadership principles are not just words painted on a wall. So as we grow, we're very conscious about our culture and how we propagate it. And we do this by ensuring that the leadership principles are at the forefront of hiring, of performance reviews, and promotions. So for example, in hiring, the leadership principles are assigned competencies to each of the interviewers. The hiring manager assigns leadership principles that are most critical to the role that they're trying to fill. The interview debrief and the discussion is centered on how well the candidate met Amazon's bar, specifically with regard to the assigned leadership principles. Managers are also using these leadership principles to build business cases for promotion and for performance evaluation. So it's very much mechanized through all of Amazon's human resource processes. Let me give you a few examples of the exact leadership principles. One of them is ownership. And in it, Amazon says that leaders think long-term and don't sacrifice long-term value for short-term gain. They act on behalf of the entire company beyond just their own team, and they never say, "That's not my job." Another is learn and be curious, where Amazon says leaders are never done learning. They always seek to improve themselves, and they are curious about new possibilities and act to explore. And finally, leaders have a bias for action. Speed matters in business, and many decisions and actions are reversible and do not need extensive study. And we value calculated risk-taking. I share these leadership principles with veterans all the time, and they feel a close connection from the culture that they're coming from. And many of them see themselves in these values. And I tell them often, Amazon values alignment with our leadership principles much more than the exact skill and the exact experience that you bring. We believe that we can teach skills and that you'll gain experience over time. So this is just a sampling of the characteristics that Amazon believes are just the best measure for potential long-term impact as we make hiring decisions and promotion decisions. So the working group is exploring this, some of these examples that I've shared with you here at Amazon, as well as a number of other companies. But I think without question, there continue to be a number of questions to consider as we move forward. How are characteristics currently a factor in an organization's interview process? And if it's applied across different industries, roles, and levels, how so? Specifically, tech versus non-tech roles, junior management versus senior management roles. There's a lot of things to explore as we dive into this a little bit further. How can these characteristics drive success in a future that demands more human-machine teaming? And how can veterans take what we're learning and leverage them based on marketing themselves and their own development as they approach their transition time? So it's an exciting time for the future of work working group, and it's a pleasure to be a part of what we're doing.
Lisa, John talked about the importance of human characteristics when hiring an employee. But if employees need to learn new skills every 3 years, credentialing and breaking down the complexity of credentialing is critical. For the last 20 years, your work has focused on the development and implementation of programs to promote the professional development of service members and ensure their smooth transition from the military to the civilian workforce. There are many roadblocks to credentialing for veterans and military spouses, whether it's during transition, every time a veteran moves, as well as the renewal and transfer of that credential. What can organizations do to address these roadblocks, and what needs to change?
Sure. Thanks, Liz. And I definitely appreciate John's points about how Amazon is increasingly using attributes and characteristics to assess prospective employees. As he said, this is a relatively new approach, and many companies, especially small and mid-sized businesses, still rely quite heavily on an assessment of technical skills. So to your point, Liz, occupational credentials are increasingly serving as a means of translating technical skills gained in the military. Thinking about, the traditional service member, many service members receive the majority of their workforce preparation through military training and experience, but it can be difficult for employers to understand the equivalency of this training and experience and how the technical skills that the military trained applicants have and how they apply to their civilian jobs. Communicating technical skills and competencies is not only a challenge for service members and veterans. What we're finding is that even in the civilian workforce, employers are increasingly relying on post-secondary credentials to better understand an individual's qualifications. Candidates with non-academic credentials, such as occupational certifications and licenses, are increasingly sought as a way for candidates to demonstrate competence and skills. For transitioning service members and veterans, attaining a civilian occupational certification or license is especially important. And they have become the currency of choice for documenting their technical skills and to show that their skills are on par with their more traditionally trained civilian counterparts. Attaining an occupational certification or license can be difficult due, in general, to the complexities of the credentialing system. These complexities make it especially difficult for service members and veterans, though. So for one, if you think about the credentialing ecosystem, there are multiple government and non-government players involved. As far as licensing goes, licenses are typically required by either state or federal law or regulations. At the state level, there may be varying requirements from one state to the next, and not all states will provide reciprocity or recognize the another state's license. This makes it very difficult for service members, and for that matter, for their spouses who move frequently, to attain or even maintain a state license. This is exacerbated by the fact that the same licenses and certifications required or preferred by employers in the civilian workforce are not typically required in the military. And the entities that establish the eligibility requirements for certifications and licenses don't typically account for non-traditional workforce training, such as military training and experience, making it difficult for a service member or veteran to translate or to demonstrate that they meet eligibility requirements. Fortunately, to your point, some significant initiatives have been undertaken in recent years to reduce barriers that service members and veterans face in attaining certifications and licenses. The military now offers voluntary credentialing programs so that service members can attain civilian occupational credentials during military service. The GI Bill will also pay for veterans to attain these credentials. But improving the economic mobility landscape for service members and veterans requires concerted efforts by numerous stakeholders, including policymakers, employers, credentialing bodies. If you aren't actively involved in these initiatives, a few things can be done. I'm going to mention a few different things here, but they're going to be highlighted on the Bush Institute Stand To website, where you can also get more information about them. So one of the key things that you can do is learn a little bit more about existing programs to facilitate credentialing of service members and veterans. DoD has a lot of online resources to show how military occupations map to civilian occupations and to civilian credentials, and to show what credentials will be paid for in military service. The DoD SkillBridge program offers opportunities for employers to place transitioning members in pre-apprenticeship or job training programs during the service member's last 180 days of military service. And there are many new technologies for assessing service member and veteran qualifications against credential requirements, and we'll include those resources on the website. The other thing that I encourage folks to do is to participate in initiatives that are designed to improve the signaling of labor market needs. There are a number of things that have been undertaken in the past few years, like the Credential Engine Initiative, which is seeking to document and provide transparency behind credentials in the workplace. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation has a number of initiatives underway to improve translating skills in the talent marketplace. The final recommendation that I have is to replicate best practices. And there's a great opportunity to learn more about what some of these best practices are. Lumina has recently funded the Military Credentialing Advancement Initiative. And it's basically a roundtable of stakeholders who have been brought together to identify best practices. And that their findings are going to be published by the American Legion in March in a report. It's going to include summaries of best practices and recommendations for employers and industry, for academia and credentialing bodies, as well as for government and legislators. I think the bottom line here is that we really owe it to those who serve to ensure that the high quality training that they attained both formally and informally during their military service, as well as the extensive on-the-job experience to which they're exposed, are fully counted towards attaining quality credentials and jobs that will allow them to sustain and grow in their fields and to support themselves and their families.
Oh, thank you, Lisa, and appreciate you sharing some of the specific programs that veterans and transitioning service members may not even know are available to them. These programs will continue to be of increasing importance, and we're looking forward to continuing the conversation with you over the next few years. The task force's final working group, the Veteran Employment Programs Assessment Group, identified leading practices among existing programs servicing the transitioning service member and veteran population, and identified recommendations that veteran employment programs can adopt. The working group identified programs in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors and synthesized key insights around their performance, and also identified if COVID-19 has accelerated the three components of the future of work. Over the next 4 years, the Department of Veterans Affairs projects there will be over 1 million more service members who transition from the military to the civilian workforce and will enter into a recovering and ultimately transformed economy. As transitioning service members and veterans enter into civilian employment in an increasingly physically distant and virtual world, programs will need to evolve to continue to support, positively impact, and help prepare for the future, one veteran at a time. The group identified leading practices across the 3 dimensions of the future of work, which include the work itself, the workforce, and the workplace. Organizations should continue to offer program tracks for transitioning service members and veterans that are interested in technology and explore partnerships with certification granting organizations such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Salesforce. In the private sector, organizations should consider adding hire to train recruiting channels that provide paid on-the-job training and highly sought-after skill sets. Organizations should also consider developing programs with paid employer-driven curriculum that can provide either general or specific classroom and on-the-job training and certifications. While traditional classroom trainings were common prior to COVID-19, organizations should establish a virtual or hybrid approach and should provide virtual trainings for in-person career fairs to enable expanded impact and mitigate negative effects from the COVID-19 pandemic. The working group also found some common practices that organizations should continue, such as using social media to reach and engage with transitioning service members and veterans in new ways, and keep them updated on opportunities and programs that are tailored to support them. Organizations should also promote the use of the GI Bill, encourage hybrid participation in modules that allows for in-person and virtual attendance. The working group's full assessment white paper, including findings and recommendations, are also available on the website. The task force will continue to explore issues related to credentialing and the future of work and how employment is just one aspect of veteran prosperity. We are increasingly seeing the overlap and interconnectedness between health and well-being in the workplace and higher education pathways. It is our collective duty to evolve veteran employment programs to best meet the needs of transitioning service members, veterans, and their families, both today and in the future. John, I'd like to throw it over your way for any closing thoughts.
Well, most of all, I'd just like to thank you, Liz and Lisa. It's been a pleasure to participate in today's panel with you. It's an honor to represent Amazon on the Future of Work working group. Amazon remains committed to supporting the Stand To mission to deliver actionable recommendations related to employment, education and training, and health and well-being of our veterans and their families. And it's important to think about private, public, and nonprofit organizations, both big and small. And again, it's an honor to be here. Thank you.
Lisa, what additional thoughts and closing thoughts do you have for the participants today around credentialing and veteran employment?
Thanks, Liz. I very much appreciate the opportunity to participate in the task force and on this panel. The one thing that I think we've all realized is just how interconnected, as you said, the 3 pillars of the work we're looking at are the direct impact that successful professional development, whether it's in the form of attainment of academic or non-academic credentials, and whether it's done pre-service or post or in service or post-service, clearly they have an impact on both employment as well as the health and well-being of the service member, veteran, and their family. So they're incredibly important, and I just encourage everybody who's listening to think about the ideas that have been put forth about ways that you can contribute to reducing the barriers and ensuring the economic success of our service members and veterans.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much, Lisa and John, for joining me today. And many thanks to all the task force members and Stand To participants. The materials for each working group provide a deeper look at the issues and are posted to the website. I'd like to turn it over next to the Education Task Force.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us for the Veteran Higher Education Task Force panel. It's such an honor to be here today with Rebecca Burgess, who is a 2021 fellow with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and with Ryan Pavel, who is the CEO of Warrior Scholar. As you've heard today, education is one of our key domains in the MSI construct, as well as employment and health and well-being. And so we're excited to talk a little bit more about veterans in higher education. In the summer of 2020, we stood up the task force, which consists currently of 35 members who represent student organizations and institutions who support veterans and military affiliated students across higher education. Their knowledge and expertise and passion that are on this team is not only reflected in their work, but in their desire to really make a difference for the veteran community. We had many discussions and conversations that helped us identify 4 big areas of work that we wanted to initially tackle and where we would be most impactful in the task force. So we did that through 4 working groups. We did it through a policy working group. We did it through the COVID impact working group. We had a transition pathways working group. And then we bit off a very large project called the Higher Education Professionals Playbook, which we're very excited to tell you about. All 4 of these working groups have worked tirelessly towards the efforts that we're going to talk to you more about today. So before we dive in, I want to go ahead and set the stage by giving you some meaningful data points that you can think about during the conversation. And most of these came from the survey that you heard about earlier today, the Veteran Transition Survey. And some of the takeaways that I found from that were interesting was that 70% of the veterans who were surveyed told us that it was important for them to go back to higher education to get a better job and to make more money, which is not unlike any other traditional student, right? But knowing that they're non-traditional, it's also interesting that 67% of them stated that it was also extremely or very important to learn about things that interest them, which makes you, wonder, is that a continuation of what they did in the service, or is it something new? And also that 61% said to get specific career training. So again, could be a continuation, could be something new. So that's just worth knowing. And then about half of the veterans surveyed that are actually attending higher education said that they think that their school understands the challenges that post 9/11 veterans face. Half, guys, that's really not a big number. It's good, it's progress, but we're not there yet. And about half of those agreed that their schools offer actual resources and services to help them succeed. And then only about 2 out of 5, or 39%, said that their schools offer job placement. So those statistics aren't quite as good as we'd like to see, but again, we know we're making progress, and so I think that's interesting to flavor the conversation today. And then Ryan, through your research with the COVID working group, you found some great data points that talked a little bit more about the work that you were doing. Would you like to share those?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for being able to be here to help represent the incredible work of this task force. It's an honor. 2 quick things, right? So the conversation that's taking place now in February 2021 is different than what it was in 2020. One of the statistics that really drives that home is from a partnership between Accenture and the VA that found that after the pandemic hit, there was a 28 multiple increase in the student veterans mentioning deferments on social media. So 28 times the number, it jumped. That's an extraordinary jump, right? Which shows that we are not in normal times, right? And that's an important framing device for the entirety of what the task force is working through. The second quick one is the Student Veterans of America did some really helpful pulse point surveys throughout the pandemic. And initially there was almost 60% of student veterans surveyed were indicating that they thought the pandemic was going to have at least some impact on their educational trajectory. So that really helps underscore, again, we are not in normal times. And I think that speaks through everything that this task force has worked through.
Yeah, great points. Absolutely. And that's going to flavor, this data that we just talked about is going to flavor the conversation and the policy recommendations that we've made as a task force. And I want to say thank you very quickly to some of the organizations that shared this data with us, such as Operation College Promise and SVA and CCME. They're all just amazing. And I know there's more of you. I apologize if I missed anyone. But without further ado, I want to get into the work that we're doing and why we're doing it. So I'd like to ask Rebecca, as she has expertise in the history of veterans and has written on it many times in the past. And so I'd like to ask her today to talk more about the policies that have changed over the last 10 to 15 years. We've made progress, but yet we still have work to do. And what is most influencing the current policy conversation?
Thank you for such a splendid question, Amy. And once again, just thank you for being you and the Bush Institute for standing up this amazing task force over these months. It's really enabled us, I think, to pull from the different silos of research that so many people are in, enabling us to strengthen each other. Data is our friend. You mentioned that earlier, and I'd love to talk about that a little later. But something that we have found, thankfully, through all of the data over many years, starting, of course, with the original GI Bill after the Second World War, is that education really is the key to employment, and employment is the most proven pathway to success for veterans. And it turns out that the more we know about veterans taking the education pathway, the more we see them thriving in their post-service life as civilians who are not just kind of closing out one passage of their career, but actually investing further in all the training and the talents and abilities that they had there, and reinvesting them into our civilian society. And I think that Congress has seen a lot of that, and that's where we get the Forever GI Bill. And I think we have made so much progress in understanding the importance of education as a transition tool for our service members. But what we still are working on, we have a really hard time with, is getting through some of the stereotypes that we have been propagating through media culture, just because of kind of the civil military divide in our society, as we've gone to an all volunteer force and so many fewer now serve in the military. And one of the biggest, the overall arching stereotype is that veterans aren't people somehow. So veterans are people too, and all of the things that normal Americans who are passionate about improving their life through education still apply to them. And furthermore, it turns out that student veterans are some of the most resilient, high-performing students on college campuses today, and yet they are actually one of the most unseen populations. And so why is that? I think that's what this task force was really looking at. And it turns out there's a lot of cultural competency questions within institutions of higher learning, and there's a lot of unfamiliarity and therefore discomfort maybe about who student veterans are, and because they are seeing the needs often, and we talk about the needs because that's what we're doing to improve them, we can often forget that there are so many strong points to remember. So if student veterans are the most resilient and the most high performing, or they're capable of that, what then is standing in the way of their success? And it turns out the things that give us those resilient qualities are actually, kind of oddly, some of the barriers can be their own barriers because they are non-traditional adult learners. Actually, over 60% of post 9/11 student veterans are first generation college students. We don't think about the types of populations and demographics student veterans come from outside of their military connection, and they deserve us to see them as who they are and where they're coming from. And so not only are they first generation, therefore don't have the familiarity of how to navigate the to college process, I guess you would say. They also don't necessarily have the information in place to make the right decisions about which institutions will give them the right return on their investment in there. So we need to help them understand what types of decision models are out there that we can help them, pointing them to what type of outcome are they hoping from this education, and which institutions will offer that to them, and also helping the institutions see how they can help their student veterans, and how they should definitely reach out and recruit those student veterans as a population that will benefit them. I could go on and on, as both of you know, but I don't want to hog the stage. So is there any one of those points that we'd like to delve into a little bit more, or is that a good stage setter?
Yeah, that's great. And I think that background is really important and gives us the context too for especially the point you made about so many of our students are first generation. So imagine being that student veteran and you've just entered into higher education and you're trying to kind of figure out this new world, and then COVID hits. and everything changes. And what does that mean for your benefits? What does that mean for you as a student? And so we know that this wasn't just a reality in 2020, but is still a reality in 2021. And Ryan, you've looked at this immensely within your working group. And so I'd love to hear your takeaway on the findings and what is it that institutions need to know about what we found out and what they need to know going forward.
Yeah, sure. And I think that, one additional framer I would add on there is just to amplify one of the important things Rebecca said there, that I think a lot of the work of this working group, the wider task force, and indeed like the Institute is breaking down those silos, right? So it's bringing together people that represent the institutions of higher learning themselves, people that represent the nonprofit industry, people that represent the public sector, and being able to really have all of those viewpoints assessing and testing the assumptions underlying any recommendations that we're making. So, the things that we're talking about here are, the result of this months-long process of looking through all of this. And that's, I think why we can have a lot of confidence in that these recommendations are widely applicable and do, withstand scrutiny. So, when we were looking through things specific, your question to the COVID side. So that working group really looked at we tried to find every available survey, right? Every pulse point, everything that we could find that was measuring the impact of COVID, both on student veterans and also on the institutions of higher learning themselves, right? Because both of those are important aspects if we're going to craft recommendations for student veterans to be successful. And also at the policy level. And there were a few findings that really rose to the top that helped inform our main recommendations. So I'll break those into three here. So the first one is that there are, as I mentioned in the stage setting initially, there are many student veterans that are concerned about the impact of COVID on their ability to complete their degrees, right? That may seem obvious. I think there's something intuitive about that. There's something obvious since everybody's experienced the pandemic to some extent. But I would just say the data really backs that up time and time and time again, right? There is deep concern around the impact of COVID. One aspect of this, I think Rebecca makes some really great points about, the role of veterans on campus. And veterans are non-traditional learners, right? Once they're in higher education, which means that their needs may be a little bit different. And also, the impact of education for many of them, supporting a family. Traditional students do this as well, but supporting families and that type of thing, it can really make it even a greater impact on some of those populations, kind of ampling up the need for responsive policies. The second thing is that related to that, mental health is an enormous concern among this community, right? And so this was one of the things that we saw the most parity between the data measured from student veterans and also from the institutions of higher learning, right? So the American Council for Education did a series of surveys, incredible surveys from the presidents of from institutions across the country. And some of the top concerns from those folks consistently was about the mental health of their students, right? Because they see this, they know that this sort of thing is on the rise. And so, we need to have responsive policies that are really able to actually address that. And one of the things I love, again, about the work of the Institute is there's an entire task force dedicated to that, right? That really, I think, pairs well with what our findings were here. And the third thing is that many institutions have taken really responsive, quick action that has made a tangible difference in the outcomes, in the immediate outcomes for student veterans, right? And we don't want to lose sight of that. I think sometimes when you're crafting recommendations, it can paint this like a doom and gloom picture, right? But like many institutions, like everybody switched to virtual coursework immediately. Some did it well, some did it less well, but like everybody was trying to respond to those needs, and tremendous resources have been invested. And so we tried to find some of those success stories and said, okay, how have these institutions or these groups really responded in a positive way? And that helped inform our recommendations. So I'm happy to briefly list the three recommendations if that's helpful. But yeah, those are sort of like our three key buckets of findings: the impact, mental health, and acknowledging that there has been a lot of really responsive policies.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
I was going to say, can I cut in there? Because I think that on the non-traditional part and the obvious versus non-obvious of how COVID, I think what really came to the fore is how the GI Bill, as amazing as it is a rather inflexible tool to help veterans in their education journey, meaning it works great, or maybe not, but great when life is normal. When life is not normal, it takes a literal act of Congress for veterans to be able to adapt that. And both college administrators need to be aware of that, and the student veterans themselves. But student veterans are not just worried about themselves because of that non-traditional adult learner aspect. They have families, they have children, they have spouses. Many of them do have a disability or they are in a caregiver role. And so really their concerns are reflective of not just themselves, but the kind of small community that they are in. And I think that's something that, if you're in a registrar's office, you don't necessarily think about how the GI Bill could affect all of those things like housing, and really that financial, fear, I guess you could say, really does feed into a lot of other mental health concerns. And so I just wanted to put that out there as something that we really saw come to the forefront.
And Amy, if you don't mind, if I could say one other thing on that too. I mean, just to further keep that same thing going, right? This idea of flexibility is so necessary, right? And that is that is one of the most consistent themes you see in any of the recommendations from any of the working groups, is the need for flexibility, right? Even if you don't know exactly what you need to be flexible for, because one of the lessons of the past 10 or 11 months has been, right, you don't always know what's coming right around the corner. But flexible coursework, flexible degree completion timelines, things in that nature, right? And acknowledging where there isn't flexibility, where things are a bit more rigid, to Rebecca's great point, right, around education benefits in some ways that can be really static. That flexibility plays an enormous role. And we also know, we've seen in the data, right, that has a meaningful impact on that mental health aspect, right? When institutions and benefits are flexible and supportive, people are able to say, okay, I don't know exactly what the next period looks like, but I have the ability to be able to get through that, thanks to these responsive, flexible policies. So I'll also say this lighting on, if you see a shine on me now, like, the sun has risen now. And so this is the virtual environment that we're all in. So suddenly there's a spotlight coming off of a book. So, this is the nature of the world we live in here.
I love it. And this is so important because this is the context that people are going to want when they read these policy recommendations that are hung in draft format on the landing page. And so we hope that everyone will take a minute to look at those. And we are excited about getting those out to everyone when they are final. Thank you both for that information. So as we can see, COVID has colored everything that we are doing in the task force and all the work, and also has colored the transition process, right? And it's been interesting to watch the working group leads come together and make sure that in all the recommendations that they're making, whether it's in transition or whether it's a recommendation about COVID or about the playbook that we're building, that all of you have come together and made sure that your message is integrated and that we're backing each other's recommendations up. So I want to give take a moment really quick to give a shout out to our working group leads, because they have done such an amazing job. And so Ryan, again, thank you. You head up you headed up the COVID impact working group. You guys did amazing work. Barrett Bogue took on the transition pathways working group and is still doing amazing work with them. Tanya Eng bit off the playbook discovery and building and is still going strong with that working group. And Joe Westcott heading up our policy group and keeping us informed as a task force. So again, thank you all for your dedication and your hours of hard work on these initiatives. This couldn't be done without your expertise. So very quickly, I just want to talk about one more topic before we wrap this up today. And it's a little bit about the transition barriers to higher education. I just want to ask for your feedback. Because we've talked about the non-traditional student that is transitioning to higher education, and that they come from all different areas too, right? They may not be coming straight out of active duty. Maybe they're still in the military. Maybe they went to the workforce and came back. But are we setting them up for success in finding the right institution for them? Are we arming them with the right information so they can make the right choice and get the best return on investment?
So I was going to say that actually the research work that the Bush Institute just recently did revealed some really encouraging news about how the redevelopment of TAPS program has actually benefited a lot of student veterans and making them feel that they made a little bit more transition, success to these institutions. But something that still sticks out to me is the fact that they're not when veterans transition out of the military, they are not thinking about which institutions of higher learning they want to be near, and they are not moving towards them. They really have no clue. What they're operating off of is word of mouth and Google. And we both know that while there are wonderful things to both of those, there are some very significant downfalls. How do you know what you're finding on Google is a good option? How do you know that? And so I think that knowledge base, they don't have a college counselor, once again, helping them navigate all of this information. So there needs to be something that we should work on that helps them figure out which institutions they should be looking at and why those institutions might be the ones to help them or might be the barrier to their own success for that employment outcome that they are looking for. So over to you, Ryan, because you actually work with a lot of these student veterans as they are just about to get on with this.
We do. Yeah. Well, thank you for teeing that up. I mean, so I would say too, it's funny whenever we talk about college search, I'll share the way I found the college I went to, I think was literally on deployment, typing in college, Arabic, and veterans, and I applied to whatever schools came up. So really an informed consumer of higher education. You know, I'm fortunate that it worked out for me, but it took a little while to get there. So, you know, very, very near and dear to my heart. And also, right, I mean, so this is something where so with Warrior Scholar Project, we focus a lot with these students, right, that are the ones that are going through this process and trying to help them build that be informed consumers, because we see so many that get out that know that they want to get that higher education, but they don't necessarily know exactly how they should get from A to B. And so I love that the Transition Pathways group has, you know, really drilled down on those 3 core recommendations, right? One of those is to find ways to improve search, right? And to be able to take control of that so that you're always going to have some people that are just, you know, Googling and making decisions off of that. So, you know, through SEO, you can improve, you know, and targeting them to the right places. But in addition to that, right, some sort of a platform where you would really be able to search and get the information that is setting student veterans up for success early on in the process of the research, right? Not at the final stages, not if they've already struggled for a couple of semesters and spent GI Bill, right? You want that to happen before they hit, you know, the ground running at campus, right? That's how we want to be able to successfully utilize the GI Bill benefits. You know, and the second thing the Transition Pathways group talks about, right, their second broad recommendation, you know, they refer to as this connection point. So search and then connect. You know, and connect is really a matter of training, right? So that you, the individuals that are admitting veterans, the individuals that are supporting veterans when they're on campus, right, that they are all really trained and that they have the tools at their disposal to really be able to succeed. You know, on the policy side as well, I know that there were recommendations there. Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong, but, you know, that we're talking about training up the certifying officials, right? And the relationship between the VA and the certifying officials, you know, similar area there. You know, and then the last thing is that for the Transition Pathways group, this idea of thriving when you're on campus and the role of mentoring and future support, right? It doesn't stop once you hit campus, right? There are so many organizations, you know, including WSP, that are helping support those student veterans once they're on campus. But I love those 3 buckets.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, this has been a great conversation. I'd like to leave everyone with some parting thoughts. So Rebecca?
As you know, that I have too many parting thoughts, but one is we have excellent recommendations, 2 different sets, one for federal and state policymakers and one for institutions of higher learning. And I think it's important that we take into account one, especially that cultural competency question on the institution of higher learning you know, side, because that's where your students are going to be coming in the door. And I think that part of that is the institution should continue the good work that they have already been doing. We don't want to lose that good work in terms of the success that they have been able to foster among student veterans with peer support groups, et cetera. And so those should be continue to be invested in. The institution should also help each other by banding together with some common measurements of what high quality programming looks like across the board. And I think finally, just something for each one of us to do, whether we are in a policymaking position or not, is just to be aware that student veterans come from a vast demographic pool, that they, beyond who they are as a veteran, they are non-traditional adult learners who represent the best and brightest amongst us, and we should welcome them into our institutions of higher learning and help them thrive so that they become excellent civilians in the workforce afterwards.
Thank you, Ryan.
I mean, what can I say to top that? I'll say one of my favorite unofficial Marine Corps slogans is Semper Gumby, and I think the need to stay flexible is more important now than it ever has been before. And everything that we talked about here, all the data demonstrates, regardless of when the pandemic resolves beyond this, we need to be flexible. We need to be developing responsive policies that are crafted to meet the needs that are on the ground at any given time.
Thank you. And one last shout out to the higher education professionals playbook that's being developed and that we hope to get out by late summer or early fall. We just know that it's going to be critical to everyone out there to really build strong support programs for their veterans. Thank you both again today for being with us. And we look forward to hearing the Health and Wellbeing panel up next. Thanks.
My name is Casey Kelly, and I have the good fortune to lead all of the health and wellbeing work here at the Bush Institute's Military Service Initiative. Drawing a connection to the work of education, at the core of everything we do is data. So let me kick off by providing you with a bit of data and saying that the overall focus of our health and wellbeing work is aimed at driving increased access and better outcomes for challenges associated with the invisible wounds. At the Bush Institute, we know that there are effective treatments for the invisible wounds and that veterans can recover from things like post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, and treatments do work. But we also know that veterans are struggling to access these treatments that are most effective, that have the best outcomes. We know that we continue to have a lot of work ahead of us to help more recognize the signs of distress, connect to quality care programs, and make sure that the care that's being delivered is the highest quality evidence-based. Our Veteran Wellness Alliance connects more veterans to high quality care programs around the country by connecting non-clinical veteran peer networks like our own Team 43, Team Rubicon, Mission Continues, Team Red, White, and Blue, to name a few, with the best-in-class clinical care programs around the country. We've operationalized this through an exciting project called Check-In. We're currently operating Check-In throughout Texas, Florida, and the state of Colorado. To learn more about Check-In, please visit our website at bushcenter.org/VWA. In addition, we're excited to be collaborating with the Bob Woodruff Foundation, Wounded Warrior Project, and RAND to establish the first definition for high quality care for PTSD, mild traumatic brain injury, depression, and substance use disorders. This groundbreaking work will not only include the definition for these conditions, but it will also link specific metrics to quality care for these conditions. Through this work, we're setting the bar across the government and private sector on quality mental health care. And the output of the first phase of this work can be found on the Stand2 website and also on the Alliance website. However, we also know that in order to optimize the existing workforce of high quality care providers in the country, we must get smarter on using data and technology. We must reduce barriers to accessing telemental health care, including video and phone-based care. We must learn how to integrate digital tools such as mobile applications into the continuum of care and other technology to better match veterans' needs to solutions more precisely. As President Bush likes to remind me, we need to get the right care to the right people at the right time. And therefore, this Stand2 Health and Wellbeing Task Force is a mighty group of the world's leading experts in digital mental health care. This team has an established track record of reducing barriers to quality mental health care through technology and data science. I'm delighted for you to get to know just a few of the brilliant people that we've engaged to help us drive innovation for the veteran community. And through this work, we'll elevate awareness that technology can help us increase access to care, and we absolutely must capitalize on that. But we must also make sure that the care that veterans are receiving is high quality, no matter where they receive it or how they receive it. Without further delay, let's get started with our panel. For more information about the depth and breadth of expertise from this panel, please check out their bios on the website. I'll kick us off with a broad question for the panelists. Research tells us that access to quality mental health care continues to be a challenge for the veteran community. And there have been a number of recent efforts through leaders in Congress to create policy that opens up access for veterans into the private sector. What challenges do you see that this expansion of access to care in the private sector might present?
I can speak to that first, Casey. I think these policies are definitely a step in the right direction, but to your point, increasing access to care is great, but there really needs to be that quality control piece. If you are seeking treatment for a mental health problem and you have a poor experience in care, you've wasted time, you've wasted mental energy, and importantly, you're actually less likely to then seek mental health treatment again in the future. So increasing access to care is only good if it's high quality care. And studies have found that providers in the community, private sector providers, are actually less likely to provide high quality behavioral health care to veterans as compared to VA providers. So it's a concern. And I would just say that we really cannot forget about that quality side of the equation when we're thinking about access to care policy.
I completely agree with you, Carmen. In order to serve our nation's veterans and their families, we need to ensure that they have access to high quality mental health care. And that's achieved not only by ensuring they have access to the quality care that they need, but it's delivered in a way that demonstrates military cultural competency. As you mentioned, our research does show that providers in the private sector lack the military cultural competency to appropriately care for veterans. And it's really important that they have not only access to military cultural competency trainings, but also the time to access that training. We also need to ensure that they are provided with the time and access to evidence-based treatments. So our veterans and their families need access to high quality care that's evidence-based. And part of evidence-based care is not only that they're getting certain modalities that we know work, but also that they're tracking outcomes based on the veteran's experience in that treatment.
Great, thank you both. So what I'm hearing you say is that increased access does not mean increased quality or increased outcomes, and that we have to do both if we're going to actually address concerns related to the invisible wounds of war. Thank you. So Dr. Spray, let's dive in a little bit. In addition to these policies that are trying to open up access to care for our veteran community, we have seen that telehealth might be another way to reduce barriers to care. And during the pandemic, we've seen dramatic increases in telehealth adoption across the private sector. Why do you think we're seeing such a sea change?
Well, telehealth has actually been practiced for almost 2 decades, primarily in the VA setting. And luckily, we've seen a great expansion of the practice and an adoption of the practice as a necessity of the recent pandemic. I think some of the barriers to telehealth adoption early on was related to seeing it as a compromise to in-person care. I think that it wasn't seen as necessarily equivalent. And we know that that's not the case at all. The pandemic has really forced both patient and providers that may have had some of these preconceived notions about telehealth. It's forced them to try it out, which has largely increased their comfort with the modality. And through exposure and practice, we've really seen so much more adoption and a lot of satisfaction with this delivery method of mental health service. We know from both large randomized controlled trials and as experienced by the field and measured through program evaluation data that the effectiveness of telehealth services are pretty equivalent to in-person care. So we know that research shows that it works. It also appears to have lower no-show rates, which can lead to a greater adherence to treatment, which is so important because you have to attend the treatment in order for it to work for you. At NYU's Cohen Military Family Center, thankfully, we had identified the strengths of telehealth early on, which left us uniquely prepared for a transition to entirely telehealth this March. We initially conceptualized it as an ideal method to further decrease barriers to mental health care by saving veterans time and money, by reducing the need to commute to treatment. It also increased the anonymity of receiving care, and it reduced barriers experienced by veterans with physical disabilities. However, as I mentioned, prior to the pandemic, only about 10% of our patients had engaged in telemental health. That quickly changed to 100% in March 2020, and veterans and their families are expressing a really high degree of satisfaction with the modality.
Those numbers are amazing. Do you see that these numbers, do you anticipate that they're going to change when we've gotten the pandemic under control a bit more?
I really think that given the vast adoption and positive results we're finding, once the pandemic's controlled, we really have an obligation to use what we've learned to ensure veterans can access care, whether it be in person in more traditional settings or via telemental health.
That's great. Dr. McLean, I'd like to turn to you now. You have years of experience using technology to help more access quality care. You've led research aimed at training providers in evidence-based talk therapies, as well as leading research in web-based treatments directly for veteran customers. I'm wondering, from where you sit, where are and what are the most pressing needs for action?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of digital mental health interventions because providers cannot meet the mental health needs of veterans, right? And unequivocally, they never will. We're never going to train enough providers. Provider training is really important, but we're never going to train enough providers to like shore up the workforce to really meet that need. So if we want to get serious about access to care, using technology to deliver interventions is truly a necessity. And I think it's like an exciting time right now. There's a lot developing in this space. There are a lot of different kinds of digital mental health interventions. So there are passive monitoring tools, psychoeducational tools. There's self-management tools, which is where a lot of the mobile mental health apps would fall into. There's also web-based treatments. There are tools that are designed to be facilitated or delivered by a provider. There's tools that accompany or augment therapy. So there's really a wide range of things. And what I would say the most pressing issue is that we don't really know what works. So there's a significant lack of evidence to support the efficacy of most of these tools. Like the way that we traditionally evaluate interventions through randomized controlled trials, which typically are like multi-year endeavors, it just doesn't fit very well for this space. It's evolving so quickly. So I think we need to find ways of connecting researchers with industry. We need to find ways of evaluating these tools in a more rapid, kind of iterative way. Because right now, it feels like we're just kind of drowning in all of this new technology, and it's really exciting, but we just don't have a good sense of like what actually works and doesn't.
That's helpful. I think often we talk about digital tools as if they're sort of one category of things. And I think people usually go to like mobile apps when actually there are tools that are designed for different types of audiences and different types of outcomes. And unless we're more precisely measuring them, well, first categorizing them and then measuring them, how are we going to figure out if they're actually being effective at the behavior change we're hoping to see? Thank you for laying that out for us and highlighting that challenge. Dr. Cohen, there's a lot of talk these days about precision medicine, and you have been at the forefront of research driving personalization in mental health treatment selection and mental health care overall. Can you say a little bit so our audience can understand when we say precision or personalized mental health care, what do we actually mean?
So the goal of precision or personalized mental health is to identify for each individual things like what is the right level of care? Do you need a high intensity intervention, or can you have a good outcome with a lower intensity intervention? To identify the right sort of treatment package, right? So is this individual going to do well in antidepressant treatment, or are they going to need a psychotherapy, or which specific psychotherapy are they going to respond well to? And this sort of approach has many different goals. I go back to something that Dr. McLean said. Access to care is a really big issue, right? And she pointed out that it's going to be incredibly challenging to train a sufficient number of clinicians to provide care to those who need it. But in addition to the types of approaches that she was mentioning in terms of creating scalable digital interventions and telehealth and all these other things, precision mental health recognizes that not everybody needs the high intensity treatment. And so if we can identify who those people are, then we can selectively give them the scarce or expensive or, cost intensive intervention. And then for everybody else who can do well in a lower intensity intervention, we can provide that. And so it increases system efficiency without reducing outcomes, because the people are getting the exact kind of level of care that they need. So that's one large goal of precision or personalized mental health. But there's another side to it, right? And so in addition to trying to understand that who needs what question, precision or personalized mental health is also working on how do we craft or tailor treatments themselves to the individual. So not saying you need this level of care versus that level, not saying you need antidepressants versus cognitive therapy, but how do we make the treatment better, right? And I think that's especially important in the context of some of these more scalable treatments like digital therapy, where it can be a little bit less personalized than if you're sitting in a room with a clinician. And so I think part of the issues that we might have in terms of engagement, in terms of differences in outcome, might be due to the fact that when you're working with a really highly trained clinician, they can do things that are really specific to you and that are going to be what you need. More challenging to do that when it's a automated computer-based intervention, even if it's coached. And what personalized mental health can do is take a data-driven approach to say, okay, how can we craft or tailor this treatment so that it responds to you, so that it gives you exactly what you need when you need it, tailors the type of examples that it uses for you so they're going to be maximally effective. And that's going to make our treatments better. So this whole umbrella, this kind of big data-driven set of interventions is about getting people the right treatments, but also about improving them by tailoring them.
Well, that sounds quite ambitious to me, Zach. So I guess I'm wondering, like, if you can give us just a couple of things that are top of mind for you that are preventing us from being able to prescribe, if you will, the right care to the right person at the right time.
Yeah, that's a big question, but a good question. The whole personalized terminology is very in vogue, right? Everyone wants their things to be personalized, whether that's your car or the movies that are presented to you on Netflix, right? You want it to be personalized. And so people use that really liberally. And there's a big difference between a treatment and intervention that has been personalized in a data-driven way, where we know from studies, from research, that this component of the intervention or this level of care is really going to be well matched to you. And that's a scientific, data-driven approach. That's very different than the majority of what are actually out there when you encounter personalized treatments. Most of them really are not data-driven, and they're what we might call artisanal or intuitive. It's about, judgment, or about, we can kind of think about it, a clinician who saw a client who looked and had some of these similar features, and they make the decision based on how that client did. And that it might not. And I think a lot of the evidence we have is that approach isn't going to really improve outcomes. And I think a barrier to making personalized treatment ubiquitous is that so much of what we have out there right now is of that lesser level of rigor of science. How do we get to a better level of evidence and quality? It's about data, right? And so we need to have access to more data. So many of our research studies are these small clinical trials, and So we need larger sample sizes to be able to use the types of approaches that we need to improve the way in which those algorithms are able to match you to the right level of care or to personalized treatment. But clinical trials aren't meant to do that. So combining data sets would be one approach that would allow us to do that. But that's challenging because if you take 15, 20 different studies, very few of them measure the same variables. So it's really challenging to pool data. And that's one thing we need to be able to do. So harmonizing the things that we collect, right? Making sure that across studies, both in academia and clinical trials, but also in industry, in managed care settings, in the VA, in nonprofits. I think that's one big avenue through which we can improve things. And that's something that that you've been involved in, and that great work has been done in the space of veteran care to create a unified data set that everybody measures. So I think we need to align our measurements so that we can pool the data sets we have. We need to get bigger samples, and that's going to be made possible through things like telephone-based measurement with smartphone apps. And then we need to get the right data, and we need to move beyond the kind of simple predictors into the more rich treatment-linked types of information. So if we're doing cognitive therapy, we want to look at cognitions. If we're doing drug-based therapies, we want to look at the brain and different biological measures. So that's really what we want to do.
Yeah, I've heard you talk about it's only one issue that we need to make sure that we have enough data, but we also have to make sure that we have the right data. So thank you for laying that out for us. So team, now that we've sort of, I won't even say covered the basics, because I'm sure our audience is now thinking like there are a lot of complex issues at play when we talk about integrating technology into the continuum of care. But I think we've covered some really important pieces of potential opportunities that are maybe short-term low-hanging fruit, but also some of those things that we need to start putting in place for the longer term. So I'd like to wrap up our panel with a question to all three of you, just about what's your thinking, what's your guidance for this community, and where we should focus both on the short term and perhaps the longer term for priorities for reducing barriers to integrating technology and data science into our care system more effectively. And we can start with Amanda and then move to Carmen, and we'll have Zach wrap us up.
So for telehealth, there is still a significant barrier that exists. And that is that providers, mental health providers, are licensed on a state-by-state basis. And so while less of an issue in the VA system, for private providers, the provider must be in the same state as where the veteran or their family member is at the time of service delivery. And so that creates a big barrier when you're working particularly with a veteran and military family community that is typically accustomed to moving. We really experienced a lot of this during the pandemic, where veterans were experiencing changes in their living situations, changes in employment status, education, remote learning, family care obligations that required them to move out of state. And in order to be able to continue to provide the high quality mental health services that we could, because we had telehealth in place, we still had to face that barrier of, what do? I'm not licensed in that other state. I'm only licensed in the state where I'm used to practicing in person. So that's a big barrier that really, really needs to be addressed. It could be addressed by a variety of different mechanisms. Potentially, one area is looking into federal licensure for mental health providers. Another strategy that seems to have had some success in recent years has been to develop interjurisdictional practice compacts between multiple states, in which you can join the compact and then a provider can practice in other states that have also joined that compact. So there are multiple different professions that have tried this. Psychologists have something called PsyPact. And so one strategy could be, are there barriers to states joining the pact that we could address so that more states could be part of that compact, so there could be more practice of mental health services across state lines?
Thank you for bringing up PsyPact. I think the last time I looked at their site, there were over 15 states who had now signed on, and it's really been great to see that as a silver lining of the pandemic to gain some momentum behind it. Carmen, where's your thinking on this?
Yeah, so in terms of digital mental health interventions, we have so many different options now for veterans in terms of different ways that they could access interventions. And as I said, we really don't have a good handle on what works or what doesn't. But in addition to that, or related to that, we really don't know, who is interested in or would benefit from which types of tools. So I would say short term, we really need to get like market segmentation data with a focus on, subpopulations of the veteran community, understand, what's going to work for people. Long term, I think we need to identify dissemination and implementation strategies that are going to be effective, such as integrating digital mental health interventions into existing systems of care. Because right now, there's lots of stuff that's available. It's, on the App Store, whatever, but we don't have like a delivery mechanism, to get the right tool to the right veteran at the right time. So we need to know what that tool is, and then we need to find a mechanism for disseminating and implementing it.
And I love your nod to market segmentation, like taking a note from advertising, right? Like why have we not thought about mental health care delivery from that angle? That's great, thank you. And Zach, what's your thinking?
As with all these other areas in which we're trying to improve outcomes, there are two things you want a system to do. You want people to be able to access care when they need, and you want that care to be maximally effective. And so to do that, I think personalization is the approach to figure out three questions that will help with that. Who needs which intervention? When do they need it? And what exactly do they need? And if we can do that, that's going to improve the system. But the way that we're going to do that has to be data driven, and we need better data than we have, and we need more data.
Yeah, I think your nod earlier or your comments earlier about data harmonization is something that I've been thinking a lot about since I first heard you say that. It's not just combining data sets, it's really figuring out where there might be some intersection to get us the answers to the questions that we continue to have. So in closing, I'd just like to summarize really quickly. In the short term, it sounds like what I'm hearing is that we absolutely have to capitalize on the tremendous culture shift that's happened as a result of the pandemic towards telehealth delivery as a opening up access and reducing barriers to care. But we must not stop there. The research that we've been doing in the Alliance and the great work we've been doing in this task force, as well as the data that we're releasing today, all point to this concept that we have to start looking at subpopulations, and we have to start more precisely identifying how we outreach to different types of people, different types of veterans, and connect with them and help them actually find the type of care through the right type of tool that's really going to meet their individual needs. In order to do this, we must be smarter about how we're collecting new data, as well as how we use existing data. And I think this is particularly important as our community continues to expand healthcare outside of the VA infrastructure and into the private sector. I think we can and we should be integrating technology and data science, as you guys have all beautifully articulated, that's going to help us more effectively and more efficiently drive outcomes. And I appreciate you helping us send the message today that increased access does not mean increased outcomes. And applying modern technology and science can really help us accelerate the improvements in care for our community that this community especially has earned. So to the rest of the audience, don't forget to check out the website for the work that we've begun on this topic, and be on the lookout for our full recommendations later in the spring. And we thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Holly Kuzmich. I'm Executive Director of the George W. Bush Institute. We just now heard from the 3 task forces that we have assembled and who have been meeting over the past months and year on issues related to veteran transition as it relates to education, employment, and health and well-being. And I'm really pleased to be joined today by 3 great panelists to talk about how we take recommendations and look at where we are in improving veteran outcomes and put those into action. So today I am joined by Bob McDonald. He happens to be the April and J. Graham Fellow for the Military Service Initiative at the Bush Institute, but of course we all know him as the 8th Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Thank you, Bob, for being here today.
Thank you.
We're also joined by Anne Marie Doherty. She is CEO of the Bob Woodruff Foundation, has many years of experience leading that organization and the deep work that they do on improving veteran outcomes across the country. And then last but not least, Dr. Chris Howard, the president of Robert Morris University and a graduate of the Air Force Academy. I'm sure you would have reminded me of that if I didn't mention that in your bio.
I would, and I would remind people that Bob McDonald went to the other school, the high school in the Hudson. So we'll just want to put that on the record.
I failed to mention West Point. So Bob, that's another, your bio is so long that I didn't include that. Well, welcome all 3 of you today. Thank you for being here. The conversation thus far, in what we have heard from others, has talked about the progress that we've seen made on veteran outcomes over the past several years, but it's also highlighted some places, some uneven spots, right? Places where we're under-attending to the needs of our nation's veterans. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. And so, Bob, I want to kick off with you. One of the things we've been talking about is whether we're accurately recognizing the needs of our nation's veterans. And some of the data that we released today, the survey results that we released, show that younger African-American, Hispanic veterans, often those with with no college experience of any kind, just a high school degree, are having a tougher time transitioning. And so I'm curious to know how well you think we're doing in terms of recognizing the needs of our nation's veterans, especially as you sat atop the VA for many years and were able to really assess the needs of our nation's veterans.
Well, Holly, that conclusion rings very true to me. My biggest fear was that a single veteran, would fall through the cracks of the safety net or organization we tried to create. And oftentimes, it's been my experience in business, running the Procter & Gamble company or at the VA, that connections become very important. That if you that the problems in organizations occur at the boundaries. And it was always my dream that we would have community-based veterans organizations with all the stakeholders at the table, including the VA, and that as one veteran moved from one city to another, those organizations could connect with each other and say, hey, Captain Howard is now moving to Chicago. Let's hand off and make sure he gets all the support he needs in that location. We're not there yet. I think we've got over 175 community veteran-based organizations around the country. But I can tell you, when I got to the VA in 2014, a veteran had to go to 9 different places in the VA itself to get their address changed. Now, fortunately, we've made progress on that, but we're still not where we need to be.
Chris, I'm curious to see from your point of view, leading a university and serving student veterans on your campus, how the information you have about our nation's veterans is really driving the work that you do there, and how you assess higher ed in general in terms of its place in improving veteran outcomes.
And thank you for the question. I think like Bob said before, there's much work to be done. And I love this emphasis on the numbers. What gets measured gets done. And one of the things that we've done well at Robert Morris University and some of the top programs like IBMF up at Syracuse have done is really benchmark to see how our veterans are doing. And also we have a Center for Veterans and Military Families, because we figure it's all kind of together. How are they doing versus our students at large? And if they're not, and then if there's a delta there, what the heck are you doing about it? And then what are the resources you bring to bear to the situation, to the fight, if you're not getting what you want and what you need? So I think with the post 9/11 GI bills, with we're a yellow ribbon school, which makes up the difference between us and as a private university with a public, there are good things, but there are still gaps. Veterans still don't get all of their 9/11, all 100% of their tuition covered because they didn't serve quite long enough or what have you. Bob, when I worked in the My VA initiative with him, there were people that had less than honorable discharges, that he had a place that he wanted to, help them get where they needed to get. So obviously they're not getting the full benefit when they come to institutions of higher learning. So I think that, looking at the macro question of how are we serving our veterans and our students at large is critically important. We're doing okay, we can do better. And then hopefully later on I can come back and talk specifically about some of the intentional steps you have to do for veterans to make sure they're successful. And as you said before, Holly, especially for underrepresented minorities, who as students at large have challenges anyway.
Emery, I'd love to hear your perspective, given the work that the Bob Woodruff Foundation has been doing, as we think about this issue of quality and how we make sure that we're really driving outcomes. You have years of experience watching this and learning from it and implementing it. Can you share a little bit about where you see the state of the field on that?
Sure. Well, and thank you for the opportunity for togetherness. I feel like that's one of the things we've all missed so much from 2020. So it's a great opportunity to be together. And I think really there's been so much work. We've all been working on this for a long time, and it's pretty impressive that we're still at it. To Bob's point, there's still work to do, but there has been a lot of progress. And at the foundation, we shared Bob's vision. Bob was a huge champion for helping us establish an MOU with the VA so that we could really work alongside the VA. Quality is really important. I think from a data perspective, we've gotten very good at measuring outputs. Did the rent check get paid? Did the veteran get a new job? But when we look at the macro picture, the national picture of what the outcomes are, it's sort of a tricky problem, because if we're successful, veterans will be living well. They'll get on with their lives. They're thriving. They're doing their thing. So we're not hearing from them in the same way that we would be hearing from them when they're making that transition from the military into civilian life, or if they're in a place where they need extra support, the safety net, whether it's from the VA or from philanthropy. So really seeing the big picture and having a sense of the national outcomes is a challenge. We've made a lot of progress on that front. But what we realized is that you can reverse engineer it to the community level, understand what's happening, what systems are in place in the communities, and then community by community start to create a baseline of data. And we now have that baseline of data, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And that is giving us a picture of what's going on at the national level. But it's just, we've got to keep at it. And when we're successful, you don't always know, because the veterans that are living their lives, and that's exactly what we had in that's what we're working toward, you might lose track of them, which is just, it's a good problem to have.
Yeah. One of the things, at the Bush Institute, we do work across a variety of issues on education and economic growth, in addition to all of our work on veterans. And one of the things that I've just really been watching, bringing, my experience working on other issues is that, and Bob, I think you have said this at times, that we have a lot of data, but are we strategically using it? And are we watching key metrics move in the direction we want them to? And I'm curious as to your point of view on that. How can we, given that we have so much data, sort of what should be next for us as we think about how to use that, not just for the sake of using it, but actually improving veteran outcomes?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Holly. If I described it, I would say the VA is drowning in data, and just like I would say at the Procter & Gamble company, we had the data. The problem was developing the insights from the data, figuring out which data was relevant, and then applying those insights. I always used to say we couldn't solve veteran issues with a 3,000-mile screwdriver from Washington, D.C. That's why I feel these community-based organizations, and I know the new Secretary McDonough, believes the same thing. These community-based organizations become absolutely critical to customize the laws and the regulations of the VA for the local organization, the local community, because each requires some kind of customized solution. I think about Chris's situation at Robert Morris, where I know he has a vital connection and counselor from the VA. There's an example of taking someone from the VA, putting them in a university and breaking down that barrier, because as I said, the problems always occur at the barrier. Maybe Chris could talk about his experience with Vital.
Yeah, I'll make a couple points there, Bob. Yeah, Vital's been amazing, and I just went through some anti-suicide training with over Zoom with probably 75 faculty members. That was the first time around doing it, and it was good training for us as leaders in the institution, for our veteran students and our non-veteran students. And the individual in our Vital program is embedded in the Center for Veteran Military Families, right next to ROTC, and with a close relationship to our counseling department. So I want to come back to this point. She is a best practice. And Bob, I like what you're talking about. So, you're a Procter & Gamble guy. You were the guy. I worked at Bristol Myers Squibb years ago. And the joke was, if you've seen one hospital, you've seen one hospital. And so, getting local and bringing the unique solutions there. But to your point, having some best practices, like a playbook that sits on top of that. On the university side, that's one of the things I've been trying to do both. We try to be I've got a guy named David Osman, I would say he's not a former Marine, right? Once a Marine, always a Marine. Great guy, Robert Morris graduate, who has really great touch points with the hundreds of people that are in our veterans program. But we are always looking at the playbook from the VA, from the other VSOs, from other great institutions of higher learning to bring those best practices and layer those best practices on top of the institution. So, we have to work at both levels, I think, to be successful for our veterans.
I'd love for the three of you to dig into a little bit about this issue of what makes connections work, number one, and how do you do that? Bob, you talked about this handoff, right? And also how the VA works with other sectors. So there's a lot of conversation here. Number one, how does the public sector work with the private sector, work with education, work with philanthropy and the nonprofits? How do they do that to better make connection work? Where have you seen good examples of that? And where do you think we really have room to continue building that out?
I guess my point of view would be that the most important thing is focusing on the purpose. When I got to the VA after the previous secretary had resigned, the organization had turned inward, and that's normal. When a crisis occurs, organizations in business, nonprofits, they turn inward, and they worry more about the survival of the bureaucracy than they do caring for the customer. And the leader's job is to use something like human-centered design, a technology about providing good customer service, focusing everybody on the customer, the veteran, and understanding their journey and making sure we're providing resources for them. And as Chris said, setting up a mechanism to identify best practices and then to get those best practices actually executed around the country and around the world. And I know Anne Marie works on that at the Bob Woodruff Foundation as well. But what it requires in leadership is empathy and humility. Humility, knowing you don't have the right answer, knowing you want to provide the right answer, knowing you want to care for each individual veteran, but being humble enough to know that you may not have the solution, and you desperately are working to search for it. And I know Anne Marie, and I know Chris, and I know both, and I know you, Holly. I know you all to be humble leaders, and I think that's an incredibly important trait.
Anne Marie, where have you seen connection really work, and how have you seen this, kind of cross-sector approach really working, and where do we need to take it?
Well, I think one of the most important things we can do is listen. We really need to listen to the people who are doing the work in the communities. And there's been a lot of conversation and evolution for all of us in our approaches over the years about not being prescriptive. What works in one place may not work in another place. And so if you can listen, you can extract the insights so that's, the data, also the interpersonal connections, really just gleaning through those conversations what maybe you wouldn't understand from a report or qualitative data, and really looking at how to not be prescriptive, but to extract those best practices so you can replicate success, like Dr. Howard said, so that you're not recreating the wheel over and over and over. And I have seen the leaders who are working on this, we're all coming together so that we're stronger together. And I've seen a lot of leaps and bounds of progress in the last few years. So I think we are moving forward, and authentic relationships, listening, and doing the work community by community is an approach that's worked for us.
Dr. Howard, you talked about the playbook sort of that you wanted to see, more broadly speaking, and I want you to hit on what you have done at Robert Morris, and what are some of the best practices that you either have already implemented or that you're looking to implement, that really should be, guides for the higher ed community broadly.
Sure. A couple of things. First off, as Bob mentioned before, and it comes out of his pores, is leadership matters. I happen to be a veteran, so it comes very natural to me, but there's a lot of people that are not veterans on our campus that care deeply about the mission of serving those that bore the greatest burden, right? And so I set the tone from the top, and, starting with the individual, and I think Anne Marie was kind of alluding to this, caring for people. I start off with the idea that we want our veterans to feel like they have a sense of unit, a sense of place. We that serve can remember walking in with a big stack of orders and going to the S1 or the A1 or whatever personnel person and saying, I'm reporting, Captain Howard reporting for duty. And so we want to, with our Center for Veterans and Military Affairs, which we think is a best practice, is a really wonderful physical space that we try to get some corporate dollars to do for us. We couldn't find the corporate dollars, and we said, and one of my senior vice presidents says, Dr. Howard, we're just going to do it. We were going to figure out in our capital budget and do it. And now everybody comes to it, which is the second point. We in higher education, we can convene. There's a great group of VSOs, veteran service organizations in downtown Pittsburgh, in a building. It's fine. But there's something about bringing people onto a campus and being able to convene to be able to get those public-private partnerships that Bob and Anne Marie talked about that we're just good at. And we have a wonderful sort of space to do that. In terms of best practice that I've seen, and this really comes from David Osmond, is not stopping or being satisfied when people just graduate or even get the first job. Because one of the metrics out there is that even though veterans get jobs, they're 70% less likely to get the next job. And so the ability to coach and coalesce and create support, because going from like E4 to E5 in the Navy might be a little bit different than going from being a supervising, an individual contributor in IT at PNC Bank to being a supervisory one. And we need to give more support with beyond transition. It's the transition. And so we, even as a university, because we have that sense of place, we want to continue to provide that scaffolding and support going forward.
One of the things that really came out of the 3 task forces was this issue that, there have been groups meeting on education, employment, health, and well-being, but of course they should not be separate, right? In many ways, what the education task force was talking about were the mental health needs of student veterans on campus. And Dr. Howard, you just hit on this issue in employment. It's often this issue, not just of getting your first job, but sort of this underemployment issue, and how do you continue that? And these intersections between the three are really important. So even we're guilty as charged, right? Sometimes of thinking about, okay, we're going to go tackle education over here, and we're going to tackle employment over here, and we're going to tackle health and well-being over here. I'm curious as to the experiences you all have had, the issues you've seen, on how we need to have better integration among these issues, and whether you see that amongst the veteran community, and how we can really advance that issue, where we're making sure we're really not just talking about these issues in a silo and connecting the dots.
It's a natural question, Holly, and a really, really good one. As you look at these issues, if you look at them from the standpoint of the large organization, whether it be the Bush Institute or the VA, you tend to look at them programmatically. You know, the three programs. When you look at them from the standpoint of the veteran back to the organization, you look at them totally differently. And that's why I think human-centered design gives us such instruction. Look at everything from the veteran back, and get the veteran, the social worker, the counselor, the Dr. Howard, the person that they need to help them integrate everything coming their direction. And that's why this counselor, this helper, this person based in the community is so important. That's also why at the VA we set up something in business you call a CRM system. Think of USAA, we're all veterans. You call USAA, they say, "Hey, Dr. Howard, we just heard you had another child, you bought a new house, you have a new car." They know what's going on in your life from the other times you contacted them, and they're able to customize their service for you. That's the mindset I think we have to have, is kind of in business you call the CRM, a consumer response mindset. Now with digital technology, we can treat every individual as themselves, as an individual, and we can take care of their individual needs. That's the ideal.
First off, don't give me a heart attack, Bob, that Barbara's having another baby. That would be really scary. Deanne's having one too. It's a great one though. But you're right, USA does do a great job, and they do start with the veteran, but they overlay that with great technology and best practices. And by the way, shouldn't the veterans have the best practice? Shouldn't they? Don't they deserve that? And especially those that have gone through the most and have the least coming out of it, deserve the best. They the top of mind thinking. PA Serves. We have a Pennsylvania Serves chapter organization here. It predates my time, and there's a larger umbrella that it sits under. I think under IBMF up at Syracuse, but it's been a great convener. The Heinz endowments have been very much almost like the Bob Woodruff Foundation, have been really good at sort of just wrapping themselves around that and bringing all these different pieces in, and we don't really miss a meeting. And what was really powerful is that, and again, predates my time here, if as a veteran comes on to this site, if there's any problem they have, you as an organization have to commit to putting your name on the website. And when they call it, you have to respond within 24 hours. So there's a quality thing, and they actually do some secret shopper stuff, if I remember correctly. So we're basically saying education, healthcare, mental health, employment, you go one place. And so Robert Morris and I think Pitt and I think a couple of the universities have signed up to be the education partner. So if our people get a call, we call back, and if we need to send them over to Pitt or some other school, that's fine. But we have this, voice of the customer comes first, one-stop shopping. And then and behind that, there's been some really great conferences. I've actually shared a stage with Mike Haney from Syracuse and talked about the PA Surge, which again falls under a larger group. So those types of programs are systematically making it better for veterans. And I wanted to lift it up as a best practice that has worked in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I would just add to that I think, especially with the lens of philanthropy, that we shouldn't be too rigid. And I think that's what we're all saying each in our own way, that we need to be flexible and nimble. And at one point, I think we were talking about, how do you know if the needle is moving? And the needle can move based on what the issue is. So we didn't know we were going to all need to flex because of COVID this time last year. And food insecurity was not a priority effort for the Bob Woodruff Foundation this time last year. We look at, our when we're measuring the needle at Woodruff Foundation, we sort of classify as health and wellness, and then successfully reintegrating vets into communities. Food insecurity and COVID emergency response was not a part of that initial strategy, but we were able to flex because the needs changed. And so with all of the work that we're doing, I think we need to continue to adapt as the conditions change. And that is one of the, I think it's kind of fun to have that role in philanthropy, because it's our job to be fast and nimble. Government can't ordinarily move as quickly. And so we're sort of the safety net of the safety net. And as we address the need and fill that gap, our job is not to do that forever. Our job is to do that so that the systems that are in place can adapt and accommodate the need as the needs change. And I think we demonstrated that a lot last year, although it was, challenging for everyone.
Yeah, I'd love to make sure we just talk a little bit about COVID and the pivots that you all have had to make. Some of this and what you've learned from that. Some of it may cause you to adjust how you do things into the future, right? I mean, we're all learning some valuable lessons from this. So Dr. Howard and Anne-Marie especially, but Bob, please weigh in. Sort of what have you seen, what have the pivots you've had to make to better serve our nation's veterans in this time of COVID?
Well, with us, it is a question of, they're students. So the veterans that we're serving most directly and their families are students. And so the challenges you see with students in general are the challenges you're seeing to some extent exacerbated by veterans, with veterans. Food insecurity, Anne-Marie. We have a food pantry in our Veterans Center, and it has been used more since I've been here as president than any time before. And that's directly related to COVID. Mental health, 33% of students in general show up with mental health challenges, usually depression or anxiety. Veterans have their own subset of that, and that has been attenuated because of the isolation in the sense of remorse and loss caused by COVID. Now, the silver lining is the federal government has changed the guidelines for mental health, telehealth. And hopefully, knock on wood, even when COVID subsides, we're going to keep that available to our students, because we've seen we still do some in-person stuff, but our students and our veteran students have used that, and that's one thing that's been some sort of positive. But but the other piece of it is veterans have, and this on the positive side, being in this whole weightlessness of COVID feels a little bit like being downrange in a deployment. And there's a mental toughness and resilience that our veterans bring to the fight that they show when they're walking around campus. We are on campus, we're socially distanced, but we're in person for the most part, even though we've been de-densified. And veterans bring us an esprit de corps and a sense of we're going to get through this, that shows some of our other students on campus, especially our younger ones, that that toughness and resilience is there.
I would build on that. And I'm so glad you said that, Dr. Howard, because I probably wouldn't have mentioned this as part of our COVID response, but we have a healthy number of veterans and military spouses or former military spouses on our team. And that was that resilience really came through last year. It's incredible to think about how our team really came together. But our COVID response, certainly unfolded over time. But the first thing we did, and we were one of the first organizations that I knew of where we closed our office. We're based in Midtown Manhattan. We closed our office, and at the time thought it was, just for a bit so that we could figure out what was happening, but get everybody off the road. And doing that quickly, the decisiveness to do that quickly allowed us to pivot immediately to our program. So it stopped being about us, the business. It was like, you're off the road, we're working remotely, you've got your laptop and cell phone, and it became about the programs and about the mission, and the unity and the focus of that, I think, in hindsight, really helped our team get through that. But it also gave me the opportunity to have a lot more health and safety of the team was prioritized. So then I was able to think about, what are we going to do? And I went to our board with something that I think back on now. I mean, I went to the board and I said, look, we're a public foundation. So we raise money and then we invest that in best-in-class programs. And I said, what if we took all the money we were planning on spending incrementally throughout the year and spent it all now as responsibly as we can in response to COVID? What if we just did that? And the board unanimously supported us. And if you know who's on our board, it's an incredible composition of leaders, and I had their support to do that. So that was our first big pivot on the program side. We're a data-driven organization. So I have to shout out to Dr. Meg Harrell, our Chief Programs Officer, and our amazing programs team, because I said, we're going to spend all the money, but we're not compromising the objectivity, rigor, or transparency. But the needs have changed. Like we talked about the needle. So we went back to the local partner self-assessment tool, the baseline of data that I was talking about, and decided to self-publish a research paper predicting the needs of COVID for veterans. And we published that paper within 2 weeks after New York City went on lockdown. So the amount of accelerated effort and the expertise on our team was really remarkable. But that paper informed our initial tranche of grant making. But we also did things like, we're not going to tell you what you need right now. You tell us what you need, and we're going to give you more time. And like the reports, they still matter, but they don't matter. Like they're not more important than the mission. And I think back on 2020 and the challenges that we faced as an organization and the amazing support of our board, the resilience of the team, the veterans and military families. I know that was a long answer. I'm just really enthusiastic because I feel like we came through a really hard time and we made a lot of decisions that really tested our mettle about putting the mission first. And it's fun to reflect on that.
That's a terrific answer. And by the way, I love the fact-based, data-driven, but big heart. I think the way to go. And I would say that with us, when COVID hit, we did some significant fundraising for our Veterans Emergency Fund, and we got some real good support. And part of it was a couple of things we knew might be useful, but a lot of it was just, what do you need? You need Pampers, you need whatever. We were very nimble and agile, and we're very happy. I did the 22 day 22 push-up challenge and culminated on the 50-yard line of Heinz Field, and the outreach and the awareness of a veteran committed suicide every 22 seconds. I mean, I had people write me notes saying, "I lost my brother, I lost my cousin." It was extraordinarily moving. But the resources that came in and the way we were able to pivot, Anne-Marie, and do what was needed at the time was really very positive. Something positive, a silver lining in a very gray cloud.
Yeah.
As Anne-Marie and Chris were talking about COVID, it really accentuated things that we knew we already needed, but made us realize we needed them more quickly. At the VA, we've been working on, as Chris mentioned, telehealth forever. And we had recognized that not having broadband in rural areas was getting in the way of providing telehealth care for veterans living in rural areas. And I can remember having a discussion with President Obama about, yes, roads are important, yes, electricity is important, but what's also important is broadband. And now, as Chris said, we've got to get rid of for example, the barriers of certification that each state has, which prohibits us from doing telehealth across state boundaries. And that work is in process. We know about half the states have already done that work, half are working on it. But boy, it would be easier if the federal government and Congress passed a law that said, everybody's certification counts when you're dealing with veterans. This whole idea of knocking down state boundaries for certification is another big idea. I mean, if you've been trained to drive a truck in the military, why shouldn't that result in an automatic certification once you leave the military? It should. Yeah. And we need our elected officials to look at these things from the veteran standpoint, not the bureaucracy standpoint, and pass these laws that eliminate the state restrictions that get in the way of national certification.
That's right. Bob, Anne Marie, Chris, this is a great way to end this. I know our task forces were talking about those issues, right? Certification issues, telehealth issues. And of course, we see this issue of broadband. We need broadband to be more widely available for issues of telehealth, but we also see it in the world of education, right? I mean, our kids are learning online today, and we are seeing significant gaps across the country. So I think there's some real momentum building behind that point, Bob, that you were trying to get everyone on board with years ago. Unfortunately, it took a pandemic to really highlight how significant of a need we have in this country. Well, I want to thank the three of you. I heard a couple themes today. Number one, using data to drive really how you think about this. But then, Chris, as you just said, having a heart and really talking about, listening to the customer, listening to veterans, using this human-centered design, breaking down some of these silos between sectors. So I just want to thank the three of you for really sort of connecting the dots between the work that has been done thus far. And thank you to your commitment to our nation's veterans.
Thank you, Holly. Can I just say one last thing about the data points, which are really interesting? So we use quantitative data. One of the best things we've done at our university is survey our students. We all have institutional research, but the surveys, like, do you think that the Center for Veteran and Military Families is serving your interests? Agree, disagree, whatever. It's those quantitative questions. They show you care, and they go a long way, and give our veterans a sense of agency. I just wanted to mention that.
Okay, now that we have concluded our panel with my great guests, we are going to turn it over to our friend Terry Tennillian. Terry has recently joined the Biden-Harris administration and is working on veterans issues at the Domestic Policy Council in the White House. As a DPC alum myself, I know it's a great place to be to really ensure coordination of the federal government's efforts on behalf of our nation's veterans. So we look forward to hearing from Terry. All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Anne Marie. Thank you, Chris. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to join you at Stand To 2021. It is great to be among so many friends and colleagues on the agenda. I regret that we cannot all be together in person, and I wish I could see all your faces on the other end of this Zoom. Having participated in almost every veteran-related convening hosted by the Bush Institute in the past 5 years, I know how great it is to connect with colleagues working across sectors to help improve the lives of veterans and their families. And I know how tirelessly you all have been working in this regard as our nation faces unprecedented crises associated with the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting economic challenges. These crises have impacted veterans and their families in many ways. And today, you heard from experts across the employment, education, and health sector about how we can all, together, help ensure veterans and their families continue to thrive. I am honored to be here with you today from my new role as Special Assistant to the President for Veterans Affairs for the Domestic Policy Council. I recognize that's a long title, but I would like to take just a few seconds to explain this new role in the White House. In this position, I join a robust, diverse, and expert team of individuals dedicated to advancing the President's policy priorities. In creating this position, President Biden has signaled an important commitment to veterans and their families. While prior administrations have worked to address the unique needs of this population, this is the first opportunity to do so formally from within the apparatus of the Domestic Policy Council. As most of you know, the Domestic Policy Council, or DPC, drives the development and implementation of the President's domestic policy agenda in the White House and across the federal government, ensuring that domestic policy decisions and programs are consistent with the President's goals and carried out for the American people. President Biden's priorities with regard to combating COVID and the economic crises have been front and center in the initial actions taken by his administration over the past 4 weeks. Containing the virus, delivering immediate relief to working families, and supporting communities that are struggling are key priorities that will serve the needs of our veteran community now and in the future. President Biden's long-term priorities for supporting veterans were also made clear throughout the campaign. His inclusion of funding in the American Rescue Plan for VA is a sign of his commitment to ensure that VA continued to provide world-class healthcare to veterans. This emergency funding will be essential for making sure veterans have timely access to COVID-related care as well as other care that has been deferred or delayed during the pandemic. This funding will also be critical for ensuring VA can address the accumulation of claims resulting from pandemic-related shutdowns, and that resources will be available to modernize VA facilities and internal processes to better serve veterans. Last week, Secretary McDonough outlined these needs in a call with VSOs and provided his vision for how VA will deliver on the promises President Biden has made to ensure timely access to benefits and services for our nation's veterans. Driving forward with President Biden's other priorities for veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors will be the primary focus of my role inside the White House. Reducing military and veteran suicide, ending veteran homelessness, addressing the consequences of toxic exposures, and ensuring economic opportunity for veterans and their families all require work at the interagency. And we all know that the responsibility for honoring our veteran community requires a whole of government approach, and making sure that forward motion in this regard is occurring will be a priority. Today's presentations help to highlight the intersection of the many sectors that need to drive positive outcomes for veterans. The survey findings shared today also provided some hope for how post 9/11 veterans are faring in these unprecedented times. However, the findings also reveal some areas of continued concern, particularly with respect to help seeking for mental health related problems. Almost half of the post 9/11 veterans who were studied reported that mental health problems, but they did not try to get help. Yet almost all those who experienced a physical health problem received the treatment that they needed during the same time period. This underscores the need to expand timely access and support for veterans and their families, especially those veterans not enrolled in VA for healthcare. You have also heard from our new VA secretary that he intends to fight like hell for our veterans. The designation of a position within the DPC for Veterans Affairs is a concrete commitment to President Biden's goal to do the same. As someone who has been studying these issues that impact service members, veterans, and their families for nearly 20 years, and who has led efforts to improve how our national and community-based systems of care address these unique needs, I'm grateful for this new opportunity. Please know that I will work tirelessly to ensure that our domestic policy development consider the unique needs of veterans and their families, that it's informed by data and science with respect to how best to meet those needs, and that we are continuously focused on driving outcomes that matter. We have our work cut out for us, and I am looking forward to working with all of you in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you again to the Bush Institute for inviting me today. It has been a privilege to work from outside of government throughout these past several administrations to ensure that we address the needs of our veterans, including working alongside many of you who share the same goals. And now it is a true honor to focus on these priorities from within the Biden administration. Please do stay in touch, reach out to me directly. I look forward to our continued collaboration. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, and please wear your mask and get your vaccine when it is your turn. I look forward to the days ahead when we can gather again in person. Thank you so much.
So today, ladies and gentlemen, we heard President Bush remind us that we as a nation are better off because of those who have volunteered to serve. Nick Armstrong and the team at IVMF, alongside our friends at SSRS, helped us understand through our own data, as well as some longitudinal data sets like TBMI, that many veterans do well. And we need to know more of some of the more at-risk subpopulations, as well as double down on data efforts for families and caregivers. Kristin Saboe inspired us with the goal of leveraging veteran skills to lead national recovery. And via our employment panel, the team with Liz, John, and Lisa, in doing so, we heard that 57% of global jobs are vulnerable to automation. So in order to best position the person to meet the future of work, employers can better embrace attributes alongside skills and experience to have the best predictive framework for success in the workplace, all the while acknowledging that licensing and occupational certifications remain a currency of choice to show that skills are on par with demand. And along the way, how do we ensure that high quality training received while in uniform is more fully counted to the next career? The assessment working group reminded us of the 1 million transitioning service members who will transition and over the next number of years enter a recovering or ultimately transformed economy. Amy, Ryan, and Rebecca spoke to the impact of COVID on our nation's campuses and the discussion that education is key to employment trajectories, so critical to success. Our non-traditional adult learners, on campus are in some ways unseen, but performing very well as a large percentage are first-generation learners in that regard. The GI Bill, although remarkable in some ways, may be inflexible in others. Many of our student veterans are concerned with COVID and its impacts on their ability to finish a degree program. This, alongside the reality of the need to focus on the health and well-being of our veteran students. Of note, this is a topic of focus at the upcoming Student Veterans of America NatCon, so check it out. COVID has also revealed some notable pivots to virtual learning and some best-in-class examples. How do we retain those? And how do we help those entering into educational pathways to be the most informed consumer they need to be, as these non-traditional learners represent the best and brightest? Like Ryan said, his initial foray into education was to Google college, Arabic, veteran. The importance of good and relevant data was nested within our Health and Wellbeing Task Force panel and the knowledge that there are effective treatments out there for the invisible wounds. But we need more of the right data. We need data harmonization tied to a better understanding through market segmentation of key subpopulations that we're attempting to serve. Like Casey said, increased access does not always equate to increased outcomes. So how do we do better? Amanda, Carmen, and Zach all pointed to challenges, but exciting opportunities to leverage for the long term what we have embraced in the COVID short term. If it works now, it can work tomorrow. We need to know more of what works when it comes to digital tools while looking to break down some of the licensing barriers to delivering care to more in need while leveraging the value of telehealth. And in doing so, as Zach said, how do we get better on who needs precisely what and when? Onward to our panel with Holly Ann Marie, Dr. Chris Howard, and Bob McDonald, where I only have to say, fact-based, data-driven, big heart. Finally, thanks to Terry Tennelian for taking the time out of her busy new role at Domestic Policy Council, where her new title reveals an enduring commitment to veterans and their families within the formal apparatus of the DPC. It is not only a whole of government effort, it's a whole of nation effort, as we can all continue to focus on. Better recognition of the issues via better data practices, better access to critical supports via connection, and ensuring better delivery of support when it is available. Ladies and gentlemen, in the absence of shaking your hands, I humbly say thank you for your time. Please keep in touch with us, and we look forward to the hard work ahead. Onward.